Only an hour left. The system chimed each passing mark, just as Asher had asked. He grinned through the blood on his face, knees bent, body coiled. He hadn't spoken since the true awakening began, and he didn't need to. Virilis sang in his hand. His absolute physique drank in the strain. Astra gathered his feet, then raced up the rapier in a clean arc. Asher shot forward like a bolt, air shrieking around him. The assassins didn't flinch. They were professionals who lived with death. They moved as one, Astra flaring, and met him head-on. The forest erupted. Steel struck steel and hard, fast bursts. Sparks stitched the air. Shadows crossed and recrossed until the ground blurred beneath their feet. Asher met them all with the same sharp, crooked smile. His hand never wavered. Silver flashed. A body folded. Virilis slid on, precise and unhurried, as if the blade already knew the ending. Asher never cut where an enemy stood, only where they were about to be. Battle instinct read their choices in the split second before they made them. Instinctive adaptation bent his body through angles that shouldn't exist. Together, they turned a hunted boy into the hunter. His pulse drummed. Astra and blood surged in tandem. He moved faster. Virilis hummed with a pleased, feral note. She had tasted beast before, quick work on captive prey. This was different. This was movement without a leash. Man and weapon fell into the same rhythm. Decisions shortened to a thought. Efficiency peaked. Asher made a choice. He would not pace himself. An hour at full burn would not break him. So he stopped holding back. He ran wild. Bodies fell in his wake as he pressed forward without pause. He moved with clean, predatory economy. Short steps, shorter strikes. Nothing wasted. Blood misted. The earth darkened. Trees snapped where blades met bark. Asher threaded the night like a flicker of violet light. His eyes glowed cold under the moon. His hair whipped and settled with each turn. In the end, most of them saw only those eyes and a white flash before everything went dark. Abilities sparked across the field, but they did not slow him. His mind and body kept exact time. He read the mechanics of their powers as if he had written them himself. Panic bled into their formation. He welcomed it. He took every error they offered. A late step, a loose guard, a gap between partners. He punished each one. His gaze danced, tracking dozens of lines at once, sorting them, choosing the quickest ending. Every movement promised an execution. The glint on Virilis wasn't flare, it was a verdict. His swordwork flowed, clean entries, cleaner exits. No flourishes, only results. Air shivered along each line he drew. The rapier didn't just cut, it shaped the fight, carving space exactly where he needed it. Thrust found throat and chest. Cuts took tendons and balance. Each action set up the next until the field tilted and stayed tilted. The darkness seemed to press in, heavy and expectant, as if the night itself recognized a new reaper at work. The blood stench hung heavy, metallic on the tongue. Asher moved through it, boots sinking into the soaked ground. Squish, squish, squish. Fog had been torn away by the fight, leaving the forest bare and silent. Blood pooled in dark sheets. Bodies lay where they fell, heads stilled like stone. His breathing was steady. Spent, not spent out. Virilis pulsed. The field answered. Blood, beast, assassin, monster, stirred, lifted in thin streams, and fed into the blade. As it sank, Asher's cuts closed, skin knitting clean. The extra stayed banked inside the rapier. He felt no more assassins. He looked up at the cold silver moon, death's smell clinging as close as sweat. A presence shifted at the edge of his senses. An old man stepped from the brush, unmasked and unhurried, a rapier at his side. He didn't move like the others. I must say, you're the most dangerous war grave Crimora's seen, the man said, calm, composed. You've been watching, Asher replied, faint smile there. Was it a good show? I have, the man said. By our records, you're the first to end every assassin before the true awakening finished. No limb lost. No organ touched. Extraordinary. Black breastplate plain. Greaves and vambraces. White hair over a hard, steady frame. 2 centuries hadn't been him. He stood like a knight. If praise comes with a prize, I'll take it, Asher said dryly. 30 minutes remained. He already doubted the man could close that window. You joke after all this, the man said. Well, like that is rare. You walk like a knight and work like an assassin, Asher said quietly. What's your story? I served a fallen house, the man answered. I'm over 200, still only spark bright star. I serve gladly. Then the first son, Maurik, erased my house because my young master glanced at the second moon. The emperor did nothing. No charge. No justice. He didn't raise his voice. The weight carried anyway. So you joined the guild. Kill a wargrave for revenge. Asher asked. Yes, the man said, eyes on the moon. And when I kill you, I'll follow my lord into death. Asher said nothing. Low rank or age meant little. The danger around the man was real. 2 centuries at that level meant a hidden edge or something worse. Asher didn't believe in luck here. Your name? He asked. Respect plain. Hillary, he said, without hesitation. Asher nodded. Hillary went on. I wear the assassin's title, but I keep a knight's heart. No tricks. Let the rapiers decide. The air tightened. Hillary's gauntlet hand drew steel with a soft hiss. Asher didn't blink. No killing intent leaked, but purpose filled the space between them. Virilis appeared in his hand. Purple eyes met flat, unreadable black. Their presence pressed outward, bending wind and hush alike. A single leaf turned in the air and drifted down. It touched the ground, and both men were gone.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
In the blink of an eye, Asher and Hillary materialized at a single point in space, rapiers drawn, their rapier gleaming with lethal intent. Like twin cobras striking in perfect synchronicity, their hands shot forward, both aiming for the same point at the same moment. A sharp clang shattered the stillness as the tips of their rapiers collided. The very air at the point of impact shrieked in protest before erupting outward in a concussive burst. Their garments fluttered violently from the shockwave, yet neither combatant yielded ground. Eyes locked, they stood as mirrored reflections, 2 minds sharing one rhythm, one intent, one moment. Though their feet remained rooted, their arms blurred into motion, unleashing a relentless storm of thrusts. Each strike was met with another, a flawless counter, as steel kissed steel again and again in a savage ballet of speed and strength. Within a single minute, their rapier had clashed over 1,000 times. The ground beneath them had sunken under the strain, a crater forming from the sheer intensity of their duel. Earth and stone erupted outward, flung aside by the explosive force of their confrontation. With a thunderous boom, the earth caved in further beneath them, the sudden collapse breaking their rhythm and disrupting their successive exchange. Yet even as their footing faltered, their gazes remained locked, unbending, unblinking, bound by unspoken challenge. In the next instant, they vanished from the fractured ravine, their figures blurring into motion as they surged into the forest beyond. No astra, no elemental power, just the raw, unfiltered mastery of rapier combat. Their forms sliced through the woodland like phantom blades, each movement a testament to lethal efficiency. Trees, stones, anything unfortunate enough to obstruct their path, were annihilated in an instant, obliterated as gaping voids tore through their centers, remnants of the sheer velocity and force behind every step and strike. Beneath the waning glow of the moon, 2 streaks of light carved through the air, gliding across meters as if space itself dared not hinder their path. Each pass birthed a storm of sparks, scattering like burning embers and casting the night sky in hues of molten orange. They moved like phantoms, ghostly, untouchable, yet devastating. Blades whispered through the air, slicing reality as if cleaving through the very fabric of existence. Every clash of their rapiers resounded like the toll of a distant bell, solemn, resonant, heralding not merely combat, but the collision of two indomitable wills. It was more than a duel. It was a reckoning. Though Asher had heard Hillary claim he was now an assassin who still bore the heart of a knight, he refused to entertain such romanticized nonsense. Trusting a man like Hillary, even for a moment, could mean death. Even now, despite their ongoing duel being devoid of Astra, Asher's gaze never wavered from Hillary's entire form, watching with ruthless stare for any sudden or hidden maneuver. Virilis screamed in his grip, the blade vibrating with eagerness as Asher moved in perfect sync with it. He feinted, his rapier carving a serpentine path of deception through the air. Hillary adjusted to defend, but the moment he committed, Asher's trajectory shifted with surgical accuracy. And yet, Hillary responded, not with surprise, but as if he had foreseen it from the very beginning. Hillary's rapier shimmered, then vanished into a blur of motion. In the next breath, hundreds of crescent slashes materialized around him like conjured wind blades, as if the sheer force of his movements had compelled reality itself to obey. Asher's eyes narrowed, the purple hue in his gaze gleaming with focus. He had never witnessed this technique before, but his battle instincts were honed beyond reason. His body responded before thought could catch up. Muscles coiled. Virilis rose. The moment the swirling cuts closed in, Asher moved fluid and precise, mirroring the technique with uncanny accuracy. Together, he and Virilis unleashed the same devastating motion. In an instant, a storm of cutting wind erupted from him. Hundreds of phantom blades tore through the space between them, meeting Hillary's in a violent symphony. Sword marks ravaged the earth. Trenches split the terrain, stretching for meters. Trees, mighty and tall, were diced into clean fragments, reduced to logs as if sliced by invisible executioners. The forest groaned under the weight of their destructive power. But Asher didn't remain still. The moment he executed the technique, his perfect muscle memory had already committed and refined it flawlessly. What had taken Hillary years to master, Asher adapted within seconds. He and Virilis moved again, their synchronization absolute, one body, one mind, one blade. His arm blurred into motion. The air howled in protest, but it was forced to yield beneath the weight of his will. Hundreds of razor-sharp wind slashes bled into existence once more, but this time they carried a different purpose. No longer a mirror or a defense, they were an assault. Sharper, faster, ruthless. Each cut tore through space like a predator unchained, seeking Hillary with deadly intent. Hillary wasn't surprised by the sight before him. He had been watching Asher for the past 5 hours, ever since the true awakening began. He had seen Asher carve through veteran assassins with ease, reducing years of honed skill to fleeting moments of futility. He had watched him wield daggers with stolen precision, mimicking their techniques flawlessly. Even the whip, an unfamiliar weapon, had bent to Asher's will on the first attempt, as if it had always belonged in his hand. So no, Hillary wasn't shocked that Asher had replicated the wind-cutting technique so perfectly. And yet, a silent thunder echoed in his chest, a sensation long buried beneath layers of experience and detachment. When was the last time he had felt this? When was the last time he stood against another rapier wielder, someone who could challenge him with raw talent and unrelenting instinct? His expression remained stone. He said nothing. Words had no place in battle, not for him. Just action. Without a word, Hillary shifted into stance, silent, sharp, absolute. His presence deepened, pressing down on the world like a rising tide. Then he moved. In the blink of an eye, his form vanished into a streak of black light, erupting outward in a burst of blinding speed and overwhelming force. His rapier clashed against the incoming wind blades, not with hesitation, but with dominance. Each arc of his blade shredded through the attacks, as though they were made of paper. He cut, he cleaved, he dismantled the very air around him. Over a century of battle-hardened instinct blazed in every motion. This was no longer mere combat. It was art formed through war. A massive dust storm erupted, surging upward in a chaotic spiral that swallowed the battlefield whole. Amidst the swirling haze, only twin flashes, one black, one silver, could be seen, streaking through the smoke like gods of war unleashed. And then silence. The lights vanished, consumed by the rising veil of dust, leaving behind only stillness and a world holding its breath. Asher's eyes pierced through the churning dust storm, unblinking. Though the haze clouded sight, his senses blared within his mind like sirens, warning him, guiding him. He dared not remain still. In an instant, his body vanished in a streak of purple, retreating backward with fluid grace and sharpened instinct. Then it came. Hillary erupted from the heart of the dust like a sniper's bullet, silent, deadly, unstoppable. His form was a flash of darkness, hurtling forward with singular focus. There was only one target, Asher. Asher's eyes tracked the descent, reading every nuance in a heartbeat. From above, Hillary's rapier fell like a meteor, blazing, merciless, ready to tear reality into ribbons. But Asher met it head-on. Virilis surged forward in his grip, gleaming with intent. With a swift twist of his wrist, his blade rose to meet the descending strike. Timing and technique blended in perfect harmony as he deflected the blow with an expert parry, redirecting the killing force with surgical motion. Steel kissed steel, and the air trembled in reverence. As they moved in tandem, Asher quickly realized that Hillary's speed was escalating with each passing moment, his rapier flashing like fleeting bolts of silver. The rhythm of their exchange, once measured, had abruptly shifted without warning, as if the battle had taken on a tempo of its own. In a blink, Hillary's rapier darted forward. Asher's instincts flared. He moved to intercept, but his blade met nothing but air. The strike had already come and gone, too swift to track. Then came the sting. Steel met flesh in a single, seamless motion, clean and sharp, like a knife sliding through butter. A fresh gash split open across Asher's skin, but he didn't so much as flinch. After enduring countless wounds over the past 5 hours, his body had grown numb to pain. But Virilis responded without hesitation. The sentient weapon pulsed once, and the torn flesh stitched itself shut as though it had never been touched. But Hillary remained undeterred. He had anticipated Asher's regenerative ability. What he didn't fully understand, however, was the extent of Virilis's healing. Still, he had a theory. In all the time Asher had clashed with various assassins, he had never sustained damage to a vital organ. For example, something as delicate as the eye. Perhaps it was because Virilis couldn't mend what required absolute efficiency. With that possibility in mind, Hillary's posture shifted. In a single, fluid transition, his attacks grew savage and ferocious. Then, like a lightning bolt rending the heavens, the tip of his rapier shot forward, aimed directly for Asher's eye. Asher watched the rapier streak toward him, the glint of its edge mere centimeters from his eye. There was no time to raise Virilis, no room for parrying. His head snapped to the side in the last instant, narrowly evading the fatal thrust. A thunderous boom followed, the wind exploding against his eardrums like a concussive wave. His sense of balance wavered, thrown into disarray by the sudden pressure. Hillary didn't hesitate. In a heartbeat, he exploited the opening, his leg lashed out like a whip, driven by brutal momentum and flawless timing. Before Asher could regain his footing, a piercing ring surged through his skull, throwing his senses into chaos. In that instant of vulnerability, a powerful force struck his ankles with maddening precision. He didn't even have time to blink. Gravity seized him like a predator, dragging him downward with merciless intent. He crashed into the earth with a resounding heavy thud, the impact rippling out as cracks spiderweb beneath him. But even within that fleeting heartbeat, Asher's mind recalibrated. Instinct and battle-hardened reflexes surged back to life. As clarity returned, so did the brutal reality. He turned just in time to see a rapier thrust screaming toward him. Instinctive adaptation flared to life once more. Asher rolled to the side in a blur of motion, a frantic dodge that shifted seamlessly into a light, graceful somersault. He landed on his feet with feline poise, rising like a shadow reborn. A heartbeat later, Hillary's rapier pierced the spot Asher had just vacated. The ground erupted violently. The thrust detonated with such force that it carved a gaping crater, as though the very abyss had opened its jaws to swallow the world. Agonizing pain surged through Asher's frame. His ankle had swollen grotesquely, ribs cracked beneath the skin, and scattered fractures screamed with every movement. The impact had been nothing short of brutal, but Virilis was already at work. She needed no command, no spoken plea. The moment pain bloomed, she responded, an extension of Asher himself. Bound to him by more than will, she pulsed with silent purpose, mending torn flesh and shattered bone with instinctive accuracy. Hillary rose to his feet in a single, fluid motion, his presence now dangerously sharp. His head turned toward Asher, and for a moment, his obsidian eyes looked almost inhuman, like twin voids housing demons. He began to walk forward with measured, deliberate steps, yet with each stride, the air thickened, as though the very atmosphere strained under the pressure of his intent. Then, just as his foot hovered above the earth to complete another step, he vanished. Not with speed, but with silence. It was as though reality itself had erased him from existence in that instant. Asher's eyes widened, instincts screaming in alarm. He sensed it, a presence blooming behind him like death incarnate. A heartbeat too late, and a rapier was already there, lunging toward his spine like a phantom's dagger in the night. Movement technique, Asher thought, the thought echoing through his mind as omniperception illuminated everything around him with perfect clarity. Astra surged through his specialized veins, igniting like a storm within his body and multiplying his speed in an instant. With explosive force, Asher shot to the side, his body a blur. He evaded the fatal thrust at the very last moment, but not without cost. The rapier grazed his back, tearing through flesh once more. Yet even as blood splashed, the wound was already sealing shut, Virilis mending him with unwavering precision. Without pause, Asher launched backward, his movement a controlled explosion of speed. Virilis gleamed in his hand as he shot upward, vaulting onto a bent, crooked tree. He landed with feline balance, body coiled and perfect atop the unstable perch. Hillary was right behind him, silent. Like a phantom, he surged up the same bent tree, his black eyes locked onto Asher with unblinking gaze. He caught the slightest twitch, Asher's left hand moving toward his back. A flicker of insight sparked. Asher's hand dove into a pouch he'd taken from one of the fallen assassins. In a single sweeping motion, he hurled a volley of throwing needles, each one laced with explosive force as he surged backwards. But Hillary didn't hesitate. He dove head first into the storm of needles without so much as a blink. As they closed in, his arm rose in a blur. With calculated motion, he angled his vambrace, deflecting each projectile mid-flight. Sparks danced across his frame, but none pierced him. He closed the distance in a breath, his rapier thrusting toward Asher's throat with unnerving lethality, a strike so cold and calculated it bordered on the mind of the killer. But Asher was already there. He met the attack with one of his own, Virilis roaring forward in a mirrored thrust. The clash was instant, a collision of power and technique. The resulting shock wave shattered the warped tree beneath their feet, splinters and bark bursting into the air like shrapnel. Gravity took hold, and both fighters plummeted from the sky. Yet even in free fall, the battle didn't stop. Their weapons danced midair, strikes and counters flashing with terrifying speed as the world blurred around them. Thrust met thrust. Slash collided with parry. Feints were answered with razor-sharp deflections. Slice clashed against slice, steel singing in the air. The shattered remnants of wood fell with them, only to be torn into dust by the fury of their exchange. These were not mere warriors. They were two forces chasing death, unforgiving and absolute. Then, impact. With a thunderous crash, their feet struck the earth, the ground trembling beneath them. Dust flared outward like ripples across water, but neither staggered. Their stances held firm, unshaken, eyes locked. In that moment, nothing else in the world existed, only the one standing before them. And then, as if in perfect synchrony, it came. A surge of purple lightning crackled across the battlefield, snaking around Asher's frame like a living storm. It danced across his body, casting his figure in flashes of violent brilliance, raw power crackling with each breath he took. At the same time, searing crimson flames erupted around Hillary, blazing to life with a regal fury. They wrapped his form in fire, casting him in a knightly silhouette, upright, composed, and deadly, the embodiment of controlled destruction. As though fate itself had sounded an unseen signal, they moved. Both figures vanished, blurring from sight in titanic bursts of speed. Space rippled in their wake as gods clashed beneath the sky. The waning darkness that had cloaked the forest began to dissolve entirely, giving way to the violent bloom of crimson flames and purple lightning that tore into existence. With a deafening roar, both elements collided, an elemental clash so potent it threatened to cleave the forest in two. The resulting shockwave surged outward in a brutal tide, hurling trees, earth, boulders, and stone alike into the air. What wasn't flung was utterly annihilated, swallowed whole by the overwhelming forces at play. A deep tremor reverberated through the land, as though a meteor had struck the heart of the forest. Lightning crackled violently, twisting through the air with serpentine madness, each thunderclap sharp enough to rupture eardrums. Flames raged with searing brilliance, the heat distorting the very air, rising to a fevered pitch, as if reality itself might melt under its wrath. Gaping ravines tore open the earth, their jagged mouths stretching toward the heavens. The ground beneath glowed with molten fury, transformed into a river of lava, while the merciless lightning scorched everything in its path, leaving nothing but blackened ruin. Within the veil of darkness and swirling fog, two titanic figures, one wreathed in crackling lightning, the other engulfed in roaring flames, collided with a thunderous impact that shook the world. Their forms, lost in motion, became silhouettes of raw elemental frenzy, one painted in searing crimson, the other in radiant purple. There was no restraint. Each warrior drove the other to the brink, every clash of their weapons echoing in a blaring crescendo that tore through the silence like a scream from the abyss. Smoke curled into the heavens, thick and suffocating. The surrounding beasts, seized by primal fear, fled in desperate retreat, instinctively knowing to run, lest they be incinerated by the flames or torn apart by the shockwaves that shattered the air around them. Their blades met with the fury of a tempest, sparks erupting as though the very air recoiled from the violence. Steel screamed against steel, each strike a war drum's beat, echoing like thunder beneath a storm-choked sky. They moved in a symphony of death, blades flashing like lightning bolts wrenched from the hands of an enraged god. They did not pause to breathe. They did not pause to blink. They did not pause to think. They did not pause to speak. They simply moved. Their bodies flowed with ruthless grace. Eyes sharp, hands precise, feet relentless. They were no longer men, but forces of nature bound in mortal flesh. Fatigue held no dominion here. No, exhaustion dared not lay a finger upon these godlike beings as they tore into one another with cataclysmic clash, each blow threatening to reshape the world around them. Another overwhelming force surged between them as their rapiers clashed once more, yet neither yielded. Their feet remained anchored to the earth, unmoved, as though the very ground bowed to their resolve. The air before them detonated with absurd force, yet they didn't flinch, didn't blink, unshaken by the chaos erupting around them. They traded thrusts like poets weaving verses, each strike a stanza, each cut a line of elegant brutality. Their movements danced like silver rivers under moonlight, fluid, graceful, and deadly. Parries and slashes wove together into a seamless tempest, a duel so precise it blurred the line between violence and art. They met and parted like waves crashing upon an eternal shore, every collision pulsing with the raw, untamed force of nature itself. Asher's rapier moved with rapturous impulse, Virilis streaking forward like a spear of judgment. Lightning enveloped his entire form, wild, radiant, and unyielding, dancing along the blade in arcs of crackling madness. Opposite him, Hilary's flames surged in response, flaring with demonic intensity as his own rapier flowed, like the firestorms of the underworld. Each clash released a cacophony of sizzling energy and shrieking sound, lightning snarling against flame, steel howling against steel, as the two combatants weaved destruction into every movement. In mere minutes, the forest bore the scars of their conflict, entire swaths reduced to smoldering ruin. Trees lay in charred heaps, the earth was split and burning, as they drove each other forward with nothing but pure, lethal intent. Hilary's figure blurred as he launched backward, crimson flames trailing behind him like a comet streaking through the dark. He came to a sudden halt, planting his feet as his rapier rose, its tip leveled at Asher with precise, silent intent. In a single motion, his arm recoiled, flames surging violently around him. Then he vanished. His form tore through the air, surging forward like a blazing arrow loosed from a divine bow. The thrust that followed was sharp, deadly, and merciless, a technique honed for the kill. Asher's senses flared, danger screamed in his bones. Whatever Hilary had just unleashed, it wasn't ordinary. It was a technique, and a fatal one at that. Instinct overruled thought. He didn't dare parry. He didn't attempt to block. Instead, he moved. A thunderous crack split the air as Asher's form became a streak of purple lightning, vanishing from sight in a bolt of raw speed, evading death by a breath. The moment Asher vanished, Hilary's thrust erupted with cataclysmic force. A torrent of flame exploded outward, devouring the space Asher had occupied, like an all-consuming beast unleashed. The inferno surged forth, its tendrils licking and incinerating everything in their path, carving a smoldering void into the heart of the forest, as if reality itself had been torn open by the sheer ferocity of the strike. But before the embers could settle, Hilary's senses flared. Something was behind him. His body moved before thought could catch up. Shoulder, foot, and arm snapped into perfect alignment, his center of gravity shifting with fluid movement honed by countless battles. His rapier screamed upward just in time, meeting Asher's descending blade in a blinding clash. The impact roared like a thunderstorm's outrage, Asher's strike descending like a judge's gavel with undeniable finality. The force rampaged through Hilary's frame, threatening to break his stance apart, but he held firm. The earth beneath him cracked and sank under the weight, but Hilary didn't flinch. Not even for a second. They vanished and reappeared in flashes of devastation, each movement a storm of unrestrained power. Astra surged through their veins with relentless fervor, as if they wielded an infinite wellspring of energy drawn from the cosmos itself. Blows rained in rapid succession, thrusts, slashes, cuts, and counter-thrusts, each technique crashing against another in a duel of relentless mastery. Every strike was met with its equal, every motion born from instinct sharpened into perfection. Their footprints marked the scarred earth, etched deep into the ruined forest like echoes carved into the sands of time. Their feet danced across the battlefield, brushing the ground with divine efficiency, while their rapiers met and parted, again and again, like the ceremonial kiss of a sacred vow, sealed in steel and sanctified by the heavens themselves. The sun began its slow ascent, inching above the horizon as if the heavens themselves sought to remind them. Time was slipping away. The darkness and fog that had veiled the battlefield began to retreat beneath the golden tide of morning, light bleeding softly into the ravaged forest. Hilary, catching sight of the rising dawn, made a choice. For the first time since the battle began, he broke his silence. His lips parted, and his voice rang out, not merely loud, but thunderous, a sound that cut through the clash of steel and the howl of flames. It carried the weight of authority, of power, of finality. A single word, yet it seemed vast enough to drown the storm that surrounded them. Freeze! A single word cleaved through the battlefield, a realm already teetering on the brink of apocalypse. It struck Asher's ears with the force of a divine edict, as though the voice of a god had commanded mortals to obey without hesitation, without question. The moment the word reached him, Asher felt its weight crash down upon his existence. His entire body halted, not with a gradual deceleration, but with an unnatural, absolute stillness, as if time itself had been forcibly arrested. The crackling lightning that once danced along his form froze mid-arc. His heartbeat, his breath, his very footsteps, everything was suspended. Even Virilis, ever eager in his grasp, fell silent. Only his thoughts remained, trapped in the echo of that word, reeling as they struggled to comprehend the sheer magnitude of what had just occurred. Hilary moved without the slightest hesitation, no breath, no thought, only motion. His figure surged forward, rapier already aligned for a single, lethal thrust, one precise strike meant to bring finality. Asher felt it before he saw it, a thrust so absolute it threatened to erase his very existence. In that instant, time unraveled around him. Memories bled into his vision, his former life before transmigration, the long numbers in his bank account, the woman he had once called the love of his life, Jennifer. Even fragments of his new life flickered before his eyes, a brief, bittersweet montage flashing like a final tribute to his existence. It was as though his soul had already accepted death. And then, Hilary's rapier closed the last of the distance, its gleaming tip mere centimeters from Asher's head. In a sudden flash of silver light, Asher vanished from his position. Position marker had been activated with nothing but a thought. His form reappeared atop the very tree he had marked earlier. He had chosen this location with foresight. The first time he used position marker to teleport to this tree, he had leapt down after healing and resting, intentionally leaving the tree intact. He'd predicted that the assassins might target it if they knew its significance. Now, that decision had proven vital. His gamble had been correct. As his body solidified atop the tree, the unnatural stillness that had bound him dissipated. His limbs stirred, and his thoughts surged forward once again. So, it's a second ability, Asher realized, his mind racing. Up until now, he had assumed Hilary's gift lay solely in his flames. But this was something else entirely. A command that manipulated reality itself. Only a rare few were born with more than one abilities. Emperor Zolthamir Lux Vanfilmore came to mind. Asher exhaled slowly, knowing full well, had it not been for Virilis, the sentient blade's unique ability to teleport both of them with a mere thought, he would already be dead. But his relief was short-lived. Before his thoughts could even conclude, the word came again. Freeze! Hilary's voice rang out once more, sharp and absolute, a decree upon the world. And he was already there, behind Asher, his rapier mid-swing, arcing toward Asher's neck with the force of calamity itself. Another shock surged through Asher's mind as his entire body froze once more. His eyes widened in disbelief, the weight of the moment crushing down on him like a thunderclap. Ow! The question roared through his thoughts, as fierce and relentless as his own lightning. Then, in that fleeting instant, faster than breath, his mind rewound everything. Every step, every clash since they had both tapped into their elements. And suddenly, it all made sense. He remembered how, amidst the whirlwind of combat, Hilary had subtly begun to steer their battle toward a specific point, the very tree Asher had marked as his teleportation anchor. At the time, Asher had thought nothing of it. In the chaos of battle, movement often seemed random, unrestrained. But now, the pieces snapped into place with frightening clarity. Hilary had orchestrated it from the start. He had been watching, calculating. studying Asher's patterns with surgical precision. He knew, as if he had been inside Asher's head, that the only teleportation marker was that tree. He had anticipated everything. Hillary knew that when he invoked freeze, Asher's only chance of survival would be to teleport. And so, he maneuvered the fight toward that very point. The moment Asher vanished, Hillary would be there, already arriving, already prepared to cast freeze again, cutting off every possible escape, trapping him within an inescapable sequence. A checkmate in motion. All these thoughts cascaded through Asher's mind, unfolding with brutal clarity as he stood frozen, realization crashing in just as fate prepared to strike. Indeed, any reincarnated or transmigrated being should know better than to underestimate an old man. Asher mused, his thoughts razor-sharp even as the rapier closed in on his neck like a guillotine of light. But just as the blade was about to sever his head from his shoulders, his form vanished once more in a blur of silver. With a thunderous swoosh, Hillary's rapier tore through empty air where Asher's neck had just been. The sheer force of the swing shredded the tree into ribbons, its splinters instantly igniting into flame. In the next breath, even the embers were gone, reduced to drifting ash. Deprived of a foothold, Hillary's figure plummeted from the sky, landing with a graceful yet abrupt descent. For the first time, shock flashed across his expression. His meticulously crafted plan, built on observation, calculation, and control, had failed. He had another teleportation point, Hillary thought, his mind reeling. It was a variable he had never accounted for. His gaze snapped toward a distant point. There stood Asher, calm as moonlight, watching him with unreadable eyes. How many more? Hillary wondered, a rare flicker of doubt creeping into his thoughts. The new location Asher had appeared was the location where he had placed his third and last teleportation mark. He had already thought ahead, just in case the second teleportation mark had become compromised. Asher stood with composed poise, his purple eyes locking with the obsidian gaze fixed upon him. Both he and Hillary understood the unspoken truth. Only 2 minutes remained before the true awakening comes to an end, and within that fleeting window, Hillary had no realistic chance of killing Asher. Hillary's freezing ability demanded direct line of sight. The moment his eyes strayed from a target, its mobility would be instantly restored. This inherent limitation significantly restricted the scope of its use. Should Hillary ever lose his sight, his second ability would become entirely ineffective. Moreover, it could only be activated twice per day, an unforgiving constraint that required meticulous planning and precise execution, much like the calculated approach he had taken against Asher. In perfect unison, they dropped into their stances as if governed by a single mind. No words were exchanged, none were needed. Understanding flowed between them like instinct. Neither could overpower the other, one surviving through unparalleled talent, the other through the crucible of battle-hardened experience. And so, they would decide life and death with a single, all-defining strike. Astra surged through their veins like a chalice overflowing with divine wrath. Flames and lightning bloomed, spiraling into frenzied chaos, the elements themselves bending to their will. Their gazes locked, silent, final. Then, with a mere thought, they vanished. One became a streak of blinding purple. The other, a flash of furious crimson. Both channeled every drop of Astra they possessed into the clash, an ultimate gambit. And then the world broke. They collided with the fury of gods, like twin titans, rams driven mad with fury, locking horns beneath a collapsing sky. The battlefield exploded into a surreal tapestry of purple and crimson, their energies colliding with such force it birthed a deafening echo that shook the earth. Concentric shockwaves tore through the forest, leveling all in their path. Dust erupted like geysers, and a mushroom-shaped cloud of smoke surged skyward, reaching as if to scrape the stars themselves. Deep gouges and ragged sword marks carved themselves into the earth, a battlefield turned graveyard. The forest lay devastated, trenches stretching hundreds of meters in every direction, a chaotic monument to the sheer magnitude of their clash. From the smoke, from the ash, from the apocalypse, from the carnage, a lone figure stood, unbent, unbroken. Purple hair crowned his head, as if reality itself had anointed him sovereign of the storm. His upper body was bare to the world, his garments long since reduced to cinders by the inferno. Lightning, tinted in shades of purple, danced and crackled across his frame, alive, furious, divine. His purple eyes gazed toward the horizon where the sun began its solemn ascent, casting golden light upon the ruins left in his wake. Hillary was gone, devoured wholly by the cataclysm he could neither contain nor escape. And now, only one remained. One man stood above it all. Asher fucking Wargrave. Within the hall where every Wargrave had gathered, the aura which had been absent suddenly appeared. The entire hall was drenched in presence as battle intent and madness exploded outward in a controlled chaos. It erupted from every single one of them at this moment, causing their blood to boil. What they were seeing defied reality. They watched the 10th sun sleep for over an entire hour during the true awakening. Which of them had ever even done this? They wouldn't dare to. No, they didn't dare because they never had the time. They were running for their lives. They saw the way he fought. They could see his battle experience increasing with every motion, every movement. Their eyes burned into the heads-up display before them. Their gaze didn't dare peel away from the screen. They didn't even dare blink or miss a moment. They watched with absolute clarity, pride overflowing in their blood and pumping through their veins at this very moment. But none spoke. They simply watched. They watched as the 10th sun plowed through assassins like a lawnmower through blades of grass. They could tell he had learned the dagger techniques on the spot, then went ahead to use the whip like it was just another weapon in his arsenal. Then they saw him close his eyes. They didn't know why, but they assumed it was one of the assassin's abilities. Still, the 10th sun moved without hesitation, without pause, without delay, as though vision never mattered to begin with. They watched him jump into different abilities like it was nothing. They could see the way he moved like he was one of the assassins, absolutely silent. Head soared as he moved. Blood painted the sky like a canvas. Bodies dropped like flies with every motion. They saw him dodge attacks that should have been impossible, as though he possessed an ability to see a split second into the future. But as they were all battle maniacs, they could tell the 10th sun was reading the assassins and predicting their movements and attack through their muscles movement. But someone whose battle experience over the past 6 months came from a controlled environment shouldn't be capable of this. Even if it was due to talent, it shouldn't be at this level. Not yet. In their eyes, everything was beautiful. It was epic. It was divine. It was graceful. They could only watch in silence, not daring to speak and break the moment. Then it came, the assassin, the night. They heard his monologue, which soon turned into a dialogue. They couldn't be bothered to ask the first son which noble household the assassin was talking about. They couldn't be bothered with the words of a weakling for any reason. But they couldn't help but wonder if the 10th son's winning streak had finally come to an end. Maybe it was time for him to change tactics from attack to perhaps defense. The knight had 2 centuries of battle experience. That alone was outrageous. Coupled with a cultivation level that stood above the 10th son's, it seemed like the 10th son had no hope at all. But their thoughts proved wrong. The 10th son had done the opposite. He confronted the man face to face without taking even a step back. Then it came. The battle of rapiers. There they saw it. Talent like never before, movement like never before. They saw rapier techniques and movements the 10th son had never shown since the beginning of the true awakening. The 10th son hadn't shown his true rapier skills until now due to stamina conservation. He had allowed the rapier to act on its own and handle some enemies. But from the few moments they saw him use the rapier fully, they knew he was extremely talented. But what they saw now was different. It was overwhelming. He stood against a mountain and clawed his way through every single attack, through every single exchange. They watched him learn an attack technique on the fly, on the spot with one try, and then perfect it in the next. They watched his battle experience peak in real time as he devoured everything the night poured out. Although 2 centuries of battle experience can't be swallowed within minutes, it still didn't matter to the 10th son. Then their elements came, crimson and purple, searing and crackling, flames and thunder. The world changed colors in the heads-up display as the battle peaked to its utmost. They watched the forest they had chosen flatten across kilometers. None dared to breathe at this moment, as these 2 rapier users fought even mid-air, plummeting from the sky without a moment's pause. They all knew deep down, none of them had such a true awakening. Many of them had run away and fought as they ran and hid for a few minutes. After all, the true awakening was meant to survive, not to plow your way through like they were seeing now. But even then, they had lost limbs, eyes, ears. Their mouths were torn open. Some had injuries tear through their necks. In a nutshell, they all came back half dead in every sense of the word. But here stood the boy they once thought a failure. The boy they once thought a stain. The boy they once thought useless. The failed heir. The dim sun. Then a word echoed through the hall, just as it echoed through the forest. Freeze. They watched as the 10th son came face to face with literal death. Malric had already prepared to move. After all, they didn't know the restrictions on the 10th son's teleportation abilities. But at the last moment, he vanished. A grin spread on their faces like madmen. Then again, the grin vanished just as quickly. For the moment the 10th son vanished, the night vanished too. His words cut through the hall, and forest once more freeze. This time they didn't doubt. They watched with expectation. The 10th son had pulled off so many miracles that they now felt inferior in terms of talent. And as though meeting their expectations once again, the 10th son vanished. He had already thought ahead yet again. Then they watched as the 10th son and the night ended it in one move that could only be described with one word: divine. Through the haze, through the dust, through the fumes, they saw their bloodline stand upright without a single injury. His back straight, his weapon in hand, the sun pouring down its rays on him, as if bowing to the show he had put on earlier. Seeing all this, their battle intent and aura erupted in utter controlled madness. The hall shook. Cracks snaked across its walls. The windows shattered as grins widened, and various whites of eyes could be seen throughout the hall. Even Azarin Wargrave, the pre-march, was not left out. His own aura flared at this moment as the air screamed in defiance. Tharic, the 9th son, was no different. Although he hated the 10th son, the truth right in front of his eyes couldn't be denied. He had loved every bit of the past 6 hours. And so, these madmen welcomed another madman into their mad rank. Within the decimated forest, Asher stood calmly, his breath steady. His hair danced to the wind of his own apocalypse. His eyes were on the sun rising on the horizon as he just stood there, as if still digesting everything he had just gone through within the past 6 hours and 30 minutes. He had never imagined his life would suddenly become something like this. Going to sleep and waking up in another world for no reason at all. Then training for 6 months for the so-called true awakening, which he knew nothing about, only to be thrown into a forest at exactly midnight and told to survive without even a single bit of support. He had gone through the true awakening in nothing but his pajamas, which were now torn to pieces. No armor of any type, just a thin cloth even the weakest fire in existence could burn through with ease. Asher sighed, his eyes glancing down alongside Virilis, who was now in his hand, humming in utter satisfaction, as though she welcomed the madness with open arms. "I never knew you were this crazy, Virilis," Asher spoke aloud, and the rapier hummed once more. Asher simply smiled and shook his head in response. Although he said that, Asher could feel his entire body rejoicing from the battle, as though every single blood cell, bone, flesh, and vein had experienced it firsthand. He couldn't deny it. At the beginning, he just wanted to survive, and if he couldn't, he would return to his room and pass it through that method. But when he switched methods and engaged the assassins without running, he had loved every single moment of it. Asher remembered his grin as he fought, as though he was a maniac who lived for the chaos. He remembered taking their lives, the feeling of his hands tearing through flesh like they were nothing. The sensation of life vanishing due to his blade, it was still fresh in his memory. He could remember the entire sensation vividly. Just a normal boy 6 months ago, now killed like a psychopath, using his bare hands to tear through a chest, and even pulling out a heart and crushing it with just a clench of his fist. The brutality that once would have made him flinch was now a casual memory. The kill count for this night alone was almost 100. Even most serial killers in his past life only touched that range of numbers after almost or over a decade of serial killing. But he had reached it in a single night. Yet, he felt nothing, neither physically or psychologically. Although he had felt something earlier during Ryan's case, since then, he had adjusted and adapted. He knew it was only a matter of time until lives fell to his blade. After all, Crymora wasn't a world that showed kindness to mercy. Although all these thoughts circled in his mind, they remained just that, thoughts. He wasn't going through any existential crisis. He wouldn't hesitate to move for the kill if another assassin stepped out again. He was simply going through the difference between his two lives, a difference so great that even the distance between heaven and earth couldn't compare. Would Jennifer love me if I was a serial killer in my former world? Or would she turn me into the police? Asher thought with a soft chuckle. Then he shook his head as he decided to forget about such thoughts entirely, dismissing them as pointless distractions. His mind shifted to his brain the way it had functioned during the past 6 hours. It was a way Asher had never thought possible. His careful planning and execution, his ability to think ahead and predict his opponent's thought processes, it all felt like second nature in the heat of combat. Right from his orphanage days, Asher knew he was extremely intelligent. He didn't even need to try to read or study. It came effortlessly. He didn't have to put in a single ounce of effort when it came to academics, which was what helped him maintain a 5.0 CGPA in his university days, and that was without even trying. Asher had watched a lot of anime about intelligent characters with a knack for planning and scheming. He had tried doing this once in a while since he believed he had the same level of intelligence, but he failed horribly at it. His mind would go blank, as though he couldn't plan or scheme anything of worth. But here, in Crymora, his mind worked like a supercomputer. He thought, he planned, he executed, and it had all worked without any form of hiccup. Even Hillary, who had planned ahead and sent him into a trap, still failed at his own strategy, all because of Asher's brain and his adaptability. Was my brain also enhanced when my body was reformed during the merge with the absolute physique? Asher wondered curiously, but he didn't feel any more intelligent. He just simply had a natural knack for planning and scheming now. Still, Asher had no thoughts of becoming a schemer. It wasn't his way. If he could wipe out his opponent with his rapier, why waste time thinking? He would only plan and execute in matters like the true awakening that forced him into a binding spot. Outside that, no brains, just straight hands. His eyes scanned the battlefield as he took it all in. He and Hillary had destroyed many things, trees, grass, boulders. Everything had been laid to waste. Trenches torn open by rapier attacks, stretching over 100 meters, could be seen almost everywhere. The ground beneath his feet was hot, molten, nearly turning to lava from the sheer intensity of the combat. Kilometers swallowed in their conquest of death. But outside their destruction, the rest of the forest stood untouched as only smoke and shockwaves reached them, silent witnesses to the massacre. As Asher took in his surroundings, the system finally came. Ding! Post at 6:30 a.m. As the system notified, reminding him of the alarm he had set earlier, Asher's form vanished before he could even speak a word. Asher felt the world and the colors around him swirl and spin, as though he had suddenly become dizzy. Then, in the very next moment, everything snapped back into perfect alignment, returning to its rightful place in reality. Blinking to steady himself, Asher opened his eyes and took in his surroundings. From what he could tell, he was now standing directly before the grand gates of the Wargrave estate. Virilis floated nearby with a faint hum, moving forward without even a moment's hesitation. Asher followed closely behind. He was just about to issue an order to the knights stationed at the gate to open it, when the massive gates creaked open on their own accord. He didn't say a word. Without pause, he simply walked in. The moment Asher crossed the threshold of the estate, numerous eyes of varying shades and intensities locked onto him, as if compelled by his presence. Each gaze carried a different reaction: shock, reverence, fear, happiness, and even lust. The onlookers were knights, butlers, and maids, staff of the estate. In the next heartbeat, every single one of them bowed deeply before Asher without uttering a word. Asher, remaining silent, walked past them all. His steps were calm, composed, and purposeful. His destination was clear: the towering, expansive castle that stretched wide and majestic across the estate grounds. Upon arriving at the castle, Asher felt a distinct pressure in the air. It was overwhelmingly heavy, almost suffocating, yet he didn't acknowledge it with words. He simply walked forward. A butler standing at the entrance door pushed it open for him, and Asher stepped inside. Once again, a new wave of eyes fell upon him, slamming into him like a tide. But this time, they carried something entirely different. There was no reverence or shock, no fear. These eyes brimmed with madness, joy, and most of all, acceptance. Asher's purple eyes scanned the entire grand hall. He saw every figure present. The 9 suns and moons stood together in unity. The 3 great elders and the 5 elders were also gathered. And at the highest point of the hall stood the Primarch himself. They all stared at him, unblinking, each wearing wide grins that reached the corners of their faces. Asher's gaze shifted, settling on Thalric. In Thalric's eyes, he saw a flicker of acceptance, though his face remained completely expressionless. In that instant, fragments of memory surged from deep within, memories that did not belong to him, but to the original Asher. He remembered vividly the moment he had failed his first awakening. He remembered the faces of those around him, looking down upon him from their elevated seats, their judgmental eyes cold and dismissive. None of them had spared him even a glance after his failure. He had become a nonentity, a forgotten disappointment. After all, a wargrave who failed to awaken on his first try was nothing but a disgrace. They cast him aside like refuse. He locked himself away for an entire year, drowning in alcohol, spiraling into despair. In the end, he took his own life with drugs. No one even noticed. He died alone, unknown, unseen, unheard, and unloved. Only Lyra had remained at his side, without saying a word, without judging him, without hesitation. And yet, now, everything was different. The same eyes that once regarded Asher with disdain now radiated acceptance and even affection. Asher could feel it in the subtle waves of aura they exuded. He had no doubt that if he were to raise his hand and point at someone, they would rush to draw their weapons and reduce that person to nothing but dust. All of this had changed because of one thing: talent. Still, Asher had no desire for revenge on behalf of the original Asher. He didn't see it as abandonment. From Ethan's perspective, now inhabiting Asher's body, the boy had simply run away from his fate, locking himself away from a world that had already given him one more chance to take hold of his future. He had surrendered. But he, Ethan, now Asher, would do what the original could not. Just like in his previous life, he had clawed his way up from the bottom. Born and raised in an orphanage, overlooked and ignored as one of hundreds, he had still risen to the top of every field he entered, using nothing but his brain. With that thought anchoring his heart, Asher's lips parted, and he spoke with calm, yet unhidden authority. "I've returned, Wargraves." The moment the words left his mouth, their auras flared violently, as though his voice had triggered a battle cry in their blood. Their battle intent surged, filling the estate and shaking its very foundations with maddening force. Asher stood his ground, unshaken. His own aura surged in response, spiraling upward until it reached the very roof. They stared at him like predators sizing up their prey, and Asher didn't falter for even a moment. He returned their gaze head-on, his presence distorting the very air around him. Then a single footstep echoed across the hall. Calm, deliberate. The sound reverberated as though it came from a distant chamber, even though it happened right there in the open hall. Azarin Wargrave, the Primarch, stepped forward and approached Asher. His voice was deep, regal, and filled with restrained pride as he spoke. "Welcome to the family, Asher Wargrave. Stand tall and proud, for you have achieved the impossible." As he spoke, he placed his palm firmly on Asher's right shoulder. Asher lowered himself into a respectful bow, placing his right hand upon his left chest. His voice rang out clearly. "Thank you, Primarch." Azarin gave a slight nod in acknowledgement, then turned away. His red cape billowed dramatically behind him as he walked back towards his private study. But as he moved, the grin on his face slowly softened into something unexpected, a genuine smile. The attention in the room shifted. Every eye that had been fixed on Asher now turned to the Primarch in astonishment. "The Primarch is smiling?" They whispered to themselves in disbelief. Azarin did not even try to hide it. Even if he wanted to return to his cold, neutral facade, he couldn't. He was far too proud in this moment. "Lily, are you watching?" Azarin thought with a soft smile, tugging at the corner of his lips. He's grown into a fine young man from the disgrace they once labeled him as. He's inherited your talent for the rapier and even surpassed it. Soon, he'll stand above you, using only the rapier techniques you once dreamed of perfecting. His thoughts drifted to his wife, Lily, who was no longer here to witness this transformation. If she had seen Asher's true awakening and his sheer talent with the rapier, Azarin was certain she wouldn't have hesitated to obliterate the entire Lux Vanthelmore royal family just for making her son unhappy. Azarin knew many would be stunned by the rare smile gracing his features. But now was not the time for such concerns. He had something more pressing to do. He needed to call Zarek. He had to show him the battle recording. This bragging material was too good to pass up. And perhaps, just perhaps, it might finally push Zarek to settle down and start a family of his own. As the Primarch disappeared from sight, all eyes immediately tore back toward Asher. "You've done well, youngest. It seems like just yesterday you visited the family library for the first time," said the voice of the great elder librarian, Morthen Wargrave. "Thank you, great elder," Asher replied with a soft smile. With that, the Wargraves began to walk away one by one, each lost in their own thoughts. None of them bothered to inquire about the limitations of Asher's blood, healing, or teleportation abilities. Perhaps they were too stunned, or simply respectful enough, to question him now. The ninth son, Thalric Wargrave, paused for a brief second, his gaze lingering on Asher. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away toward his quarters. Only Malric and Withenia Wargrave, the first sun and the second moon, remained behind. Their expressions were warm, and their gazes softened as they addressed him. "Who would have thought you had grown this strong already?" "You hit it well, youngest," Withenia remarked first, her tone laced with affectionate amusement. "Indeed," Malric added. "Were you planning to surprise everyone with your strength? Because if so, the surprise worked. I never really hid anything. No one knew simply because they never cared enough to find out," Asher replied with a grin. "You can check the records of the first training ground, though. Within the estate, only the Primarch had any awareness of Asher's abilities, based on the discrete reports submitted from the first training ground. Those records were originally used as reference points to gauge what rank of assassins to dispatch to test a sun or moon during the True Awakening. Let's get you healed first. Although your rapier possesses healing capabilities, we don't know its limitations, or if it might have missed something subtle," Malric said, shaking his head. At his words, Virilis, who had vanished earlier, suddenly reappeared with a dissatisfied hum, clearly displeased at the suggestion that her healing might have been inadequate. "Virilis, don't make a fuss about it. It's just a routine check," Asher said with a resigned sigh. "Your weapon's name is Virilis? That's a cool name," Withenia said with interest, her jet-black eyes shifting toward the rapier. Sensing her gaze, Virilis floated forward and circled around Withenia, humming curiously. "She seems to like you," Asher remarked, amused by his weapon's behavior. The next moment, Withenia's sole weapon, a slender, obsidian dagger, materialized in the air and blocked Virilis' path, as though telling her to stay away from its master. Virilis hovered in place, and the two weapons began to hum at each other, as though communicating. Asher had no interest in getting between whatever interaction was occurring between the two soul weapons, so he simply ignored the standoff. Withenia, on the other hand, watched the little exchange with obvious amusement, as though enjoying the playful show. "So, who are we meeting for the checkup?" Asher asked, turning his attention back to Malric. Malric shook his head with a light smile. "No need to bother yourself with such details. The healer is already on the way. We just need to sit and wait." With that, they walked together into a nearby waiting room, where they sat down comfortably and began to talk. Meanwhile, Virilis and the dagger had begun clashing mid-air, their blades humming with magical resonance. The echoes of their collisions rang out like distant chimes of metal, while tiny sparks danced in the air, adding a surreal glow to the atmosphere. "Is this Virilis' first beef?" Asher mused, watching the exchange through his omniperception without so much as turning his head. "Wait, Virilis has always been gentle. Since when did she start picking fights? Did the true awakening awaken some battle-hungry trait in her, or something?" He continued in thought. "Forget it." He ended with a mental sigh. "So, youngest genius, how do you feel after your true awakening?" Withenia asked, having already shifted her attention away from the duel of soul weapons. "I feel normal. Is there something I should be feeling? Was something supposed to awaken during the true awakening?" Asher responded curiously. "There's nothing new to awaken, really," Malric answered from the side. "The name True Awakening isn't about unlocking some hidden power. It's meant to awaken you to the reality of the world itself. It's brutal, unforgiving truth. It's a life or death moment designed to make you feel like the entire world of Surmara is your enemy." Asher gave a subtle nod, releasing a quiet sigh of relief. Deep inside, he had been panicking. The thought that he might have missed awakening some vital ability had gnawed at him. So, they really were watching, he thought to himself. He had guessed this when he started looking for anything that could act as a camera before he decided to give up. "What Big Sis means," Withenia added, "is that this was your first time taking a life. Don't you feel any psychological burden? We may be wargraves, but we're still human at the end of the day. We bleed. We die. And yes, we feel." Her dark, serious eyes met Asher's vivid purple ones. She spoke with care, but there was a quiet gravity in her words. Asher understood her concern. After all, he had just eliminated nearly 100 assassins. But he had no reason to lie. He simply shook his head and responded calmly. "I don't feel anything. There's no emotional burden, at least not anymore. Although I did feel it the first time, after my spar with Ryan Silvershade. But I adjusted after that." Hearing his response, Withenia and Malric nodded knowingly. They had reviewed the recording of Asher's spar with Ryan. They had seen firsthand how brutal it had been, how Asher had shattered every limb on Ryan's body with calculated, merciless lethality. "Well," Withenia said gently, "if you ever feel anything down the line, don't hesitate to speak up. You wouldn't be the first wargrave to feel the weight of psychological burden. So don't think of it as weakness. There's actually an ability to lift that burden. That's why I'm asking." Her tone was sincere, and her emphasis left no room for doubt. "No problem, Big Sis," Asher replied with a small smile. There really is an ability for everything, he thought. Here I was, wondering if there were any therapists in this era. But he understood Withenia's concern clearly. From all the fantasy novels he had read and the countless anime he had watched in his past life, there was always one common truth. Psychological weight could be a killer on the battlefield. Withenia was simply trying to prevent that from happening to him. And in her own way, she was doing it with love. As Asher, Withenia, and Malric discussed, a knock echoed through the door. "You may come in," Malric answered calmly. The door creaked open, and a tall man standing at over 6 feet entered with a composed demeanor. The moment he stepped in, he bowed in greeting. "I greet the first sun, second moon, and 10th Sunday." Asher, Malric, and Withenia didn't reply to his greeting. Instead, Withenia simply spoke, "You may proceed. And don't miss anything." Hearing this, the man stepped forward, heading toward the sofa where Asher sat. Virilis, who had been playfully engaged in a mock battle with Withenia's soul-bound dagger, instantly disengaged and returned to Asher's side. She was curious. She wanted to see if this man could truly find what her master's siblings believed she had missed. Seeing the man arrive before him, Asher asked, "Do you need me to stand or lie down for this?" "You don't need to bother yourself. 10th Sunday. Being seated is perfectly fine," the man answered. His hands rose over both of Asher's shoulders. A green glow appeared on his palms and then gently enveloped Asher. Asher remained silent, watching with rapt attention. After all, this was the first time he was witnessing a healing ability outside of Virilis. The glow surged through every inch of his body, as though scanning him for anomalies or hidden damage. The man didn't dare make eye contact. His eyes and hands remained focused on Asher's shoulders. 3 minutes passed in complete silence. Then, suddenly, the green glow vanished. The man removed his hands and turned toward Asher and his siblings. "First sun, second moon. The 10th sun is perfectly healed. He is merely physically exhausted, and his astra is almost completely depleted," the man stated formally. "You may leave," Withenia replied. At her words, the man bowed once again and left without another word, closing the door behind him. "It seems Virilis' healing capabilities are top-notch," Malric remarked with a slight chuckle. Hearing this, Virilis hummed proudly, as if saying, "Humph, don't ever look down on my greatness." "Yes, Virilis is the best in whatever she does," Asher said with a smile. He was confident, unshakably so, in Virilis's healing abilities. "But can she heal other people?" Withenia asked, her tone pensive as she voiced the thought that had been lingering in her mind. Asher simply shook his head and replied, "No, she can only heal me, the one who is soul-bound with her." Malric and Withenia nodded their heads, accepting his explanation. A shame, they both thought at the same time. It would have been a significant advantage if another sibling had the ability to heal others. "So, let's talk about your rapier's ability. We've seen some of it, but we'd like to know more," Malric said with a smile. Asher looked at the both of them for a moment. There's no need to hide it since they've already seen it, he thought. The blood-healing ability, which you already know about, is actually called Crimson Pact, Asher began. But there are some limitations. For example, if my arm or a limb is severed, I can't simply heal it with the blood of any random beast like a rat beast or a wolf. Those types of blood are only good for minor injuries. At Asher's words, Malric and Withenia fell into thought. So basically, the graver the injury, the higher the quality of blood you need? Withenia asked, summarizing. F.R. Ewe/Nav/LLcom. Asher nodded and continued, "Yes. That's why I always blocked any attack aimed at my organs like my eyes, lungs, or other vital areas while sacrificing less vital areas like my ribs or taking surface wounds. The assassin's blood could heal those gashes and cuts, but when it comes to delicate organs, I'd rather not take the risk. Better safe than sorry." Withenia and Malric nodded again as they recalled Asher doing exactly that during battle. Even the knight-turned-assassin, Hilary, had picked up on this and incorporated it into his strategy against Asher. "I guess that's a reasonable limitation. After all, your rapier can also store blood," Malric added. Asher nodded, unsurprised that they knew about Virilis' ability to store blood despite never having mentioned it aloud. After all, Virilis had healed him more than twice without actively drawing blood from anyone. Within Virilis' reserves were just blood samples from Whisper and Echo-ranked beasts, which Asher wasn't even sure could regenerate human limbs or deeper wounds. What about the teleportation ability? It seems like you can place marks in various locations, allowing you to teleport, Withenia asked, moving the conversation to another of his abilities. "That's basically how it works," Asher replied. "But the ability only works with 3 marks, no more. But we only saw you teleport to 2 separate locations. If you had used a 3rd mark, you could have had more breathing room," Malric said, raising an eyebrow. Asher simply smiled and replied, "The 3rd mark was placed in my room months ago." He didn't need to say more. Withenia and Malric instantly understood. So you could have teleported to your room the moment you woke up in that forest, into the entire true awakening before it even began, Withenia said with a smile, clearly intrigued by the possibility. A true awakening not lasting even 5 seconds would have been interesting. That might have set a record for the shortest true awakening ever, Malric added, just as amused. What about the third ability that protects you against mind-based abilities? Withenia asked next. Well, technically, that's the system's function and not Virilis's, Asher thought, but he didn't dare say it out loud. It protects my mind against many mind-related abilities, Asher answered vaguely. Which is why I think things like that psychology abilities wouldn't work on me, since they operate through the mind. Now that you mention it, that's actually true. That ability wouldn't work on you, Malric agreed. Asher nodded. Whatever mind-related skill they brought against him would be completely ineffective thanks to the system's protection. Are there any more abilities? Withenia asked. It seems I don't know about Virilis Astra Veil ability, Asher noted internally. Not really, he replied aloud, choosing to keep that ace hidden. A man should have 1 or 2 secrets of his own, Asher thought with a mental smile. What about your abilities? Would you both fill me in? Asher asked, his eyes lighting up with curiosity, clearly expecting to hear about some mind-blowing powers. Malric rose from his seat with a smirk. If you want to learn about our abilities, youngest, then you'll have to follow us to the battlefield. After all, we found out about yours on a battlefield. Indeed, Withenia added, echoing his sentiment with a grin. TSK, what is wrong with this family? Would it kill you to just tell me now? Asher thought, but he wasn't going to jump into a battlefield just because he was curious. His siblings were overpowered titans. As for him, he was just an overpowered ant, but still an ant regardless. Great catching up, youngest, Malric said as he stepped out of the room, with Withenia following right behind him. Asher sighed, then rose from his seat and walked out of the room. Stepping outside, he couldn't sense Withenia and Malric anywhere around him. They must have vanished again, Asher thought, turning in the direction of his room with a slight frown. As he walked through the hallways of the estate, thoughts swirled in Asher's mind like a storm. His greatest limitation during the true awakening had been the lack of highly potent blood. If someone stronger than Hillary had been the one to come after him instead, the blood he had gathered wouldn't have been nearly enough, simply because it had come from weak beasts. But the truth was, he had no way around it. Although he could ask his siblings for help, Asher could already guess what Malric's response would be. He might invite Asher to hunt the beast together. He, who was barely equal to a Veil-ranked beast, going against anything higher? That was utter madness, borderline suicide. His mind spun back to the brief time he'd spent with his father barely hours ago, when the mission to survive was handed down to him. If I'm asked to pick my own reward, he thought, then I would ask him for a lot of blood from at least a Void-class beast. But at the back of his mind, a whisper told him he was simply being too greedy. A Void-class beast could cause the downfall of an entire empire, and yet here he was, asking for one's blood. Still, Asher reassured himself that he wasn't being unreasonable. After all, he hadn't asked for the blood of an end-class monster, which was in an entirely different league of danger and rarity. But I wonder what gift Father has prepared, Asher thought to himself as he walked. He was genuinely looking forward to it. He couldn't contain the small flutter of excitement in his chest, but he knew he couldn't just walk up to the Primarch's study, knock on the door, and ask about it. That would be considered rude, even as a son. So he would simply wait for Zarek to sneak up to his door, as he usually did, perhaps bringing word of his father's decision. With that thought settled, his mind drifted to Lyra, the one person who had believed in him without a shred of doubt. I wonder how she's doing. I should be seeing her soon, Asher thought warmly. During the true awakening, the personal maid or butler of a sun or moon is sealed in a hidden location to prevent any kind of help or interference during the event. After all, many suns and moons in the past had secretly made their maids or butlers assist them during their awakening trials. But these attendants had always paid the price for doing so. In the end, it didn't matter that they were just following the orders of a noble child. She should be released soon, Asher thought as he walked through the corridor, his thoughts spinning. He genuinely looked forward to seeing her again after nearly dying multiple times. Even when his life had flashed before his eyes, Lyra had appeared in those fleeting images, always present, always close. As Asher approached his room, barely a few meters away from the door, his steps faltered for a split second. He had sensed a presence inside his room, and this presence definitely wasn't Lyra or Zarek. Who is it, he wondered, but that didn't stop him from opening the door. The moment he stepped in, a saber came streaking toward his neck with ridiculous speed, aiming to kill or at least seriously injure. But Asher didn't bother dodging or parrying it the conventional way. Instead, he calmly activated Position Marker and vanished from his spot, reappearing instantly on the table where he had previously placed the marker in his room. His purple eyes snapped forward, locking onto the figure standing near the door. There stood a boy, calm and composed, the ninth son, Thalric Wargrave. What is the meaning of this, brother? You know siblings aren't allowed to attack one another unless it's an official duel, Asher said, his voice turning cold. Although he had always ignored Thalric simply because he couldn't be bothered with meaningless rivalry, Asher wasn't someone who would take kindly to being attacked without provocation. But he didn't retaliate, yet. First of all, he didn't know how strong Thalric truly was. He didn't know the boy's element, nor the abilities associated with his saber. Asher simply knew nothing, while Thalric might know almost everything about him. Besides, he was still tired from the true awakening. But Asher had never been naive to think that just because he was talented and had won against someone as useless as Ryan, he could now contend with Thalric, a true Wargrave. At least, not yet. Thalric stood calmly, his red eyes fixed on Asher as though trying to stare into his soul. Then he began to speak. You know, right from the beginning, I've always hated you. Seeing you sleep, eat, and run around like a fool, it always made me angry. Asher didn't speak. He simply listened, his purple eyes meeting Thalric's red ones, unblinking and unreadable. Silence stretched between them like a drawn blade before Thalric spoke again. You don't have anything to say? Isn't this supposed to be a one-sided monologue? What do you want me to say? Asher thought to himself. What do you want me to say? Asher finally asked aloud, his voice neutral and unbothered. You're supposed to ask why. Thalric replied sharply. Did this idiot think up an entire script and now expects me to follow it? Asher thought silently. Still, he decided to play along. He had always been curious why Thalric talked down to him for no apparent reason. Why? Asher asked. Because you were the reason Mother died. If you hadn't been born, she wouldn't have died during childbirth, Thalric said. He paused briefly before continuing. All my memories of her are from when I was just a year old. You took her from me, from us, the moment you came into this world. Asher remained silent. He could hear the sadness behind Thalric's voice. He was sure that if Thalric wasn't trying so hard to maintain his composure, the boy might have broken down in tears right then and there. Isn't he only a year older than me? Meaning the memories he has of her should only be from when he was a baby. How can he even remember anything from that time? Asher thought, wait, don't tell me this fool possesses the rare condition, hyperthymesia. Asher thought in disbelief. She looked forward to me awakening the rapier, Thalric continued. She talked about it every night, putting me to sleep with tales about the rapier. I looked forward to awakening it, to training with her. Thalric clenched his fists tightly. But that wasn't possible anymore. I awakened the saber. But you, the one who took her from this world, ended up being a failure. A child who killed his own mother. A great warrior lost her life, and the son she died for couldn't even awaken, something even commoners could do. Thalric spat with venom. It tore me apart. It consumed me. If it weren't for the family's dual restrictions and the rule that heirs couldn't leave the estate before awakening, I would have killed you myself, Thalric said, his voice cracking slightly. Asher simply watched him, unsure how to respond. He had grown up without parents, without any true emotional guidance. Now he stood face to face with someone who had experienced the love of a mother, even if briefly. He didn't know what to say. Perhaps he should say sorry? But the truth was, Asher had grown up alone and learned to take care of himself without relying on others. He wasn't someone who easily tapped into emotional vulnerability. Not because he was cold-blooded, but simply because he never had the chance to grow up with that kind of emotional support. But Thalric continued, his voice regaining its strength. After watching your true awakening, I could see Mother passed her talent to you. What she had wished for her entire life finally came to life, but she isn't here to witness it. So I'm here to tell you, do not stain her name. Live up to her expectations. Thalric raised his saber and pointed it directly at Asher. I may have forgiven you because of Mother's wish, but make no mistake, I'm always watching. If any of your performances are subpar, you'll be hearing from my saber. Without even waiting for Asher to respond, he opened the door and stormed out of the room, without bothering to close it behind him. Asher could only stand still and watch, his body unmoving, his mind still trying to make sense of what had just happened. Asher couldn't quite comprehend what had just taken place. Thalric had abruptly entered his room, launched an unprovoked attack on him, uttered a series of statements, ones Asher strongly suspected were rehearsed, and then stormed out in dramatic fashion. He didn't even bother to close the door. Asher thought with mild sigh as he stepped down from the table and made his way toward the door to shut it himself. Is he going to turn into some sort of Tsundere-type brother now? Asher mused with a quiet chuckle. All his recollections of Thalric were derived from the memories of the original Asher. If Ethan had transmigrated earlier into this body, he certainly wouldn't have allowed Thalric to speak to him in that manner. But regardless of whatever attitude Thalric had exhibited thus far, Asher had no intention of letting it influence his opinion. He had made a firm decision to judge everyone based on his own perceptions and thoughts, not through the inherited memories of another person. He had encountered Thalric once before. Although the fool had been eager to exchange sharp words, Asher simply couldn't be bothered. He was utterly indifferent toward Thalric. If Thalric chose not to seek him out, then he too would not make any effort. However, should Thalric suddenly decide to act like a genuine, caring brother, perhaps Asher might consider reciprocating that sibling affection, if only marginally. With a sigh, Asher allowed himself to collapse onto his bed, his back resting against the soft mattress, eyes staring blankly at the ceiling above. His thoughts were far away, drifting towards the memory of his true awakening. That experience had been unlike anything he had ever felt before. Even now, having returned home, he found it difficult, no, impossible, to forget it. A subtle smile tugged at the corners of his lips as the sensations of that moment washed over him again. Deep within, if given the chance, he would willingly go through another true awakening. The benefits he had gained from it were, quite frankly, extraordinary. During the battle with the assassins, after he had teleported back to his position marker and fallen asleep for approximately an hour and a half, he had still managed to fight uninterrupted for 2 straight hours. Realistically, Asher shouldn't have possessed enough stamina to endure such an extended combat sequence without collapsing from exhaustion. An hour and a half of sleep shouldn't have been sufficient to recover his strength and stamina. Normally, his body would have required a minimum of 4 hours of rest. Yet he had fully recovered in that brief window due to his unique absolute physique ability, limitless physical growth. This ability enabled him to break through his own physical limits after pushing himself to the very brink of exhaustion. That particular breakthrough had allowed him to completely annihilate the assassins without holding back in the slightest, and to even fight Hillary on equal footing, relying solely on raw talent. That marked his first gain, a profound physical breakthrough. His second gain had been the sheer volume of combat experience he had accumulated. Within the confines of the true awakening, his battle instincts and expertise had skyrocketed. The experience gleaned from fighting the assassins, combined with the lessons learned during his intense duel with Hillary, had reshaped him fundamentally. 6 hours spent in a relentless, life-or-death struggle had transformed him into an entirely different person. Not to mention the rapier techniques he had subconsciously absorbed by observing Hillary's style during their deadly duel. Asher realized that such refined understanding could never be acquired from someone unfamiliar with the rapier. He might have reached a comparable level through practice, but it would have taken months. Yet, One singular event had effectively erased the need for time. Although he wasn't suddenly a master of the rapier, he had at least taken a significant step forward. In comparison, the battle and rapier experience he had gained over 6 months of training at the first training ground paled before 6 hours of authentic, lethal combat. Then came his third gain, techniques. From what Asher had read in the library, various types of techniques existed within this world. He was fairly certain that the Wargrave family possessed countless techniques. After all, each and every one of them was born with a unique weapon and their own methods of wielding it. However, from his research, Asher had also discovered that techniques weren't categorized into formal grades or ranks. They were treated as equals in theory. The disparity in power between similar techniques often stemmed from the individual using them and their level of mastery over said techniques. But Asher had always found it difficult to agree with this notion. Surely individuals operating at his father's level had created techniques so absurdly powerful that someone at Asher's current level might never even dream of learning them. Still, he reserved judgment. If the people of Crymora didn't classify or grade techniques, it likely meant they had reasons, perhaps cultural or philosophical, for doing so. From his true awakening, Asher had acquired 2 distinct techniques, a movement technique and an attack technique. Although Hillary had used 2 attack techniques during their duel, Asher was only able to replicate one. He had dodged the second attack before it had fully manifested, and thus failed to observe and learn it. The movement technique, Asher was convinced, had been taught to Hillary by whatever assassin organization he once belonged to. It certainly didn't resemble anything knights were typically trained in. The technique allowed Hillary to instantly appear behind Asher in the blink of an eye. Asher had only been able to counter this movement thanks to his omni-perception ability. Without it, he might have suffered critical injuries to his spine and other delicate organs. As for the attack technique, it allowed Hillary to forcibly manipulate wind pressure generated by his swings and thrusts into razor-sharp, crescent-shaped slashes. Asher had learned it on the spot and immediately used it against Hillary in return. Asher wasn't particularly surprised that the other assassins didn't possess advanced techniques beyond their rudimentary weapon styles. They were clearly of a lower rank. Even Hillary, who stood above them, had only managed to acquire one true movement technique from his organization. A grin slowly spread across Asher's face as he mentally reviewed his gains, rewards he had literally risked his life for. Although I should be resting, I should probably test out this movement technique, Asher thought as he sat up from his bed, driven by curiosity and excitement. His mind replayed the moments when Hillary had employed the movement technique against him. With a single step, Asher vanished and reappeared beside his table, as though he had teleported. Another step, and he disappeared again, this time emerging on the other side of the room. The more he used it, the more he began to notice the limitations. The opponent needed to be stationary for the technique to be truly effective. Additionally, it couldn't be used to traverse long distances. Still, Asher couldn't help but feel that he could refine and enhance this technique, perhaps increase its speed, range, and adaptability. That thought made him pause. Is this why techniques aren't graded? He wondered. Because with enough talent and effort, anyone can elevate any technique far beyond its original design. So, techniques are not limited by structure, but by the capabilities and creativity of those who wield them. In another location, a place shrouded in absolute darkness, a vast, circular table sat at the center of an enigmatic space. Around it were seated 10 human-like figures, each radiating a unique aura of mystery and power. Some lounged in a relaxed, almost indifferent manner. Others sat upright, with a regal authority etched into their very posture. One figure, however, was fast asleep, as though the matters unfolding around her were of no concern whatsoever. None of them uttered a word. Silence prevailed as they all kept their gazes fixed upon a massive screen hovering above the center of the table. A colossal heads-up display glowed faintly, illuminating their shadowed faces with its light. On it, the image of Asher appeared, moving with brutal efficiency as he tore through the assassins like a dragon, laying waste to a swarm of insects, insignificant and powerless in comparison. During the true awakening, the Wargrave family had not been the only ones observing the unfolding events. These 10 mysterious beings had scattered enchanted crows throughout the forest, each bird acting as a sentient surveillance device. Through the eyes of those creatures, they had watched every moment with meticulous attention. These 10 had existed for ages, their presence rooted deep in the hidden histories of Crymora. Following the catastrophic fall of the star fragment, a moment in history that irreversibly altered the world, they had risen to power in secrecy. Their true goals remained unknown. Though whispers of their existence circulated among those who stood at the pinnacle of global power, no one knew their true number. Yet these 10 stood above nearly all known entities. They rarely showed themselves and only acted personally when they wished to eliminate a being of significant strength. Then, as the true awakening came to a close, the massive display vanished, its light snuffed out like a candle in the dark. The room was plunged once more into silence and shadow. An interesting show. One of the figures murmured, a man with a soft, almost amused voice, though the smile that spread across his lips was far from sane. "This isn't a show," another replied, his tone heavy with seriousness. "Another Wargrave has risen, and based on what we just witnessed, he is extraordinarily talented. There's no need to sound so worried," a woman commented from the side with a casual tone. "He's still just a child. It will take him years, if ever, to reach our level. The Wargraves are becoming a persistent headache. And now, with the 10th son added to their ranks, I believe it's time they suffered a devastating loss," another figure said, his voice lazy, yet tinged with menace. "Oh ho, should we kill their current Primarch? Just like we eliminated the former one?" a voice asked gleefully, as though already relishing the idea of bloodshed. A different woman shook her head in response. "I suggest we go after a sun or moon instead this time. We paid a steep price when we went after the former Primarch. 3 of us fought him together, and we still nearly died, brought to the brink of death by a single human. Although he eventually perished, the power each Primarch wields is nothing to scoff at. That's only because I wasn't there," a man interjected with a cocky grin. "If I had been, such a disgrace would never have occurred. I would have ended that human with a single blow." The others didn't even glance in his direction. They were used to his reckless arrogance. "Let's not forget the losses we suffered after that human's death," another woman added, her frown deepening. "The Emoviri we spent years cultivating throughout the Zerathorn Empire were nearly wiped out by the Wargraves. Even the other dukes joined the effort." "Then it's decided," the first man said again, his voice regaining control. "One of us will target a sun or moon. In the meantime, we'll pull our primary pieces back in preparation for the inevitable retaliation from the Wargraves." "How about this?" another suggested, a wicked grin forming on his face. "When they begin their counterattack, we infiltrate the Wargrave estate and exterminate every living human within its walls. Let's first decide who our immediate target will be," another replied with a nod, his eyes gleaming at the idea of raising the Wargrave estate in a wave of blood and carnage. "Then we can plan the rest accordingly. So, who do we move against first?" The question hung in the air, prompting all 10 to fall into deep thought. "What about the 10th son?" one proposed. "He'll be going to that useless school soon. That would be the perfect opportunity. We could use him to lure out another sun or moon and eliminate 2 in a single strike." "He's still too weak," another dismissed coldly. "His death wouldn't shake the Wargraves. If we're to deliver a blow, it must count. We need someone whose loss would significantly cripple their strength." "Then how about the first son?" someone suggested. "That man has been a constant thorn in our side. He seems to have information on the whereabouts of our agents. Taking him out would weaken their power base and provide a chance to strike at their estate as well." "Indeed," another agreed, eyes narrowing. "That human called Malric is proving to be more troublesome than his father ever was. According to recent rumors, Malric may have already surpassed his father in strength." Whether that's true or not, we should tread carefully, someone else added cautiously. Are you really placing your faith in human rumors now? A woman scoffed. What's next? Are we going after those old fossils called great elders and elders? How can you mock them as old fossils when you yourself are likely older than every living wargrave combined? The man beside her shot back. He continued, I'm not suggesting we go after those elders. I propose we move against the second moon, Withenia Wargrave. Silence fell like a curtain. Withenia, a name that carried weight. Within the Wargrave family, she ranked just below her father, brother, and a few of the elders and great elders. But beyond the family's hierarchy, she was a force unto herself. Entire cities could fall beneath her feet if she so willed it. Then who will carry out the mission? And when? Someone finally asked. Before any deliberation could begin, one among them raised a hand with a grin. I will, he declared confidently. I'll take this kill. I wasn't part of the group that brought down her grandfather, but I can at least send her to join him in death. The others turned toward him briefly, then nodded. They understood. He would not back down. Then it's settled. We will reconvene once her death has been ensured. For now, we pull back our pawns and prepare. One by one, the figures began to vanish, dissolving into the darkness like shadows returning to the void. All except for one. The woman who had been fast asleep from the beginning remained. She had not spoken. She had not watched the true awakening. She had not participated in the discussion. Only the soft rhythm of her breath and the gentle rise and fall of her chest remained, completely detached from the chaos to come. As Asher was happily testing out the new movement technique, a faint smile lingered on his face. However, his steps came to an immediate pause when he heard a knock on the door. His smile widened, for he already knew who it was. Lyra. Come in, he said with a calm smile, gently sitting down on his bed. At his words, Lyra stepped into the room, still dressed in her maid uniform. Her appearance remained flawless, as always, a testament to the fact that although she had been sealed away somewhere, nothing truly harmful had occurred to her. Good morning, young master, Lyra greeted politely, her voice as serene as ever. How are you, Lyra? I heard you were locked away to prevent you from assisting me. Asher asked with a gentle tone. Although she appeared perfectly fine, he still asked to be sure. Lyra smiled tenderly before replying. I'm perfectly fine, young master. Congratulations on successfully surviving the true awakening. I never had any doubt in you. Your trust in me is always overwhelming, Lyra, Asher responded with a soft chuckle. Well, I was fairly confident you could have simply teleported here if you were in any real danger, Lyra replied with a touch of amusement. This was one of the key reasons for her unwavering confidence in Asher's survival. Well, I am a wargrave, Lyra. We don't run. It's in the name itself, wargrave. We send our enemies to the grave, no matter who or what they are, Asher said, shaking his head slightly with a smirk of pride. You seem particularly cheerful today, young master, Lyra observed, noticing the constant smile that had adorned Asher's face since she entered the room. I won't lie, I am. Most people dread the true awakening, but I actually wish there was a second part to it, Asher said candidly, not hiding his thoughts in the least. Lyra sighed in exasperation as she remarked, It seems the young master has become something of a battle maniac. Asher smirked again. Think of it as a side effect of having such a powerful bloodline surging through my veins, he said casually. He would never admit to being battle-crazed. Blaming it all on the bloodline had sort of become his go-to excuse. Standing nearby, Lyra shook her head subtly, clearly unconvinced by Asher's explanation. Everyone knew that bloodlines typically came with zero actual side effects. And even if there were any, most people would still trade anything they had just to possess a powerful bloodline. May I ask what exactly happened during the true awakening? Lyra inquired. Only those who bore the Wargrave bloodline were permitted to witness the true awakening ceremony. No one else was ever given access to that part of the family's legacy. Well, let's just say I danced with death and life far more than I should have, Asher replied cryptically, and then proceeded to explain everything in detail. He didn't hold anything back from Lyra. After all, there was nothing to hide. He began from the moment he woke up, described how he initially hid, the fights he engaged in, how he got injured, fought again, got thoroughly injured, ran out of stamina, teleported away, fell asleep from exhaustion, resumed fighting repeatedly, and finally left the forest through teleportation once more. Lyra simply nodded as she listened intently to Asher recount the ordeal he had endured. Although she had heard vague rumors about the Wargrave's true awakening, she had never known any specific details, being just a maid. Even among the Wargraves themselves, those who had not undergone their own true awakening were never informed of what to expect. They were deliberately kept in the dark. It seems your true awakening was relatively better, young master. It sounds like Virilis's healing capabilities played a crucial role, Lyra observed thoughtfully. What do you mean, Lyra? Asher asked, raising a curious eyebrow. Well, when the ninth son returned from his true awakening, he had lost an eye, his right leg, and his left hand. He was bleeding profusely. We could literally see his innards as he limped toward the estate gates, Lyra recounted solemnly, recalling the haunting image. Asher didn't doubt her for a second. Many maids and butlers must have witnessed the same thing. It appeared to be a family tradition for the returning sons or moons to walk from the Wargrave gate back into the estate, as if recognizing their survival in a life-changing battle. Thaurik must have gone through the same ordeal. How come I don't have any memories of that? Asher wondered to himself. I should have been around 14 at the time, and Thaurik would have been 15. Is it that those who haven't undergone their true awakening can't witness someone else's? He decided to drop the thought altogether. It wasn't important right now. It seems Thaurik survived purely through sheer willpower after suffering such debilitating injuries. Asher concluded. Injuries of that magnitude would have easily caused death from severe blood loss in his previous world. Correct content is on Novelbin. But, young master, Lyra continued, where do these assassins even come from? Does the household personally send them? Asher let out a sigh upon hearing the question. From what Big Brother and Big Sister told me, Father places a bounty on our heads just a few hours before the true awakening, he explained. Then, pausing thoughtfully, he continued, but I suspect that Father, or perhaps the entire Wargrave household, has some sort of arrangement with the assassin organization that sends those killers after us during the true awakening. Lyra fell into silence, contemplating Asher's theory. An agreement with an assassination organization, she echoed, confused yet intrigued. Think of it this way, Asher began. If I were the leader of an assassin organization, there's no way I'd send novices or amateurs like the ones they usually dispatch, especially not to kill a Wargrave. I would have sent someone far more skilled to end things quickly. Yet for some reason, they always send assassins who match our strength just enough to push us, to test us, but not overwhelm us. He paused for a moment to let Lyra absorb his words. If the assassins succeed in killing the sun or moon they were sent after, the organization claims the victory. But if the Wargrave heir survives, then the Wargraves earn their win. A calculated risk. A win-win situation for both sides. Asher finished, his tones steady and contemplative. Lyra nodded with her eyes narrowed. If the Wargrave wins, the sun or moon returns as something more, greater, even. If the assassination organization wins, their reputation soars to unprecedented heights. After all, how many individuals can claim to have killed a Wargrave? Lyra spoke as she arrived at her conclusion. Exactly my point. The assassin organization could easily replace such bottom feeders within their ranks. A few Faint Star Life rank assassins in exchange for a Wargrave's head is a deal that most people would kill for. But well, that's just my perspective. Neither Big Brother nor Big Sister said any of this. It's simply my own deduction based on what I've seen and heard. So don't take it as solid fact. Asher replied with measured calm. Lyra nodded her head slightly and spoke with a thoughtful expression. I believe the young master is closer to the truth than he realizes. Still, the truth doesn't particularly matter right now, not when the young master has undergone his own awakening. But the truth will matter, Asher stated with a calm smile, when the assassination organization finally betrays the Wargraves. Huh? What do you mean by betray, young master? Lyra asked in clear confusion, her brow furrowed slightly. Well, Asher began, the last true victory for the assassination organization must have occurred during my father's generation. But now, none of the current suns or moons has died during the recent true awakenings. That's 10 entire events, 10 complete chances, and the assassins couldn't secure a single win. Anyone would be frustrated after losing 10 times in a row. Don't you think so, Lyra? He asked, voicing his growing suspicion. Lyra frowned deeply. She could already picture the scenario in her mind. Although the assassination organization hasn't suffered any real losses, since they only sacrifice weaklings, they might still decide to make a bold and sneaky move, Lyra said with concern, lacing her voice. View the correct content at Novel Bin. Asher simply smiled at her words and replied, Once again, these are just my thoughts. Nothing has been proven, and there's no concrete evidence. So don't let it worry you. Yes, young master, Lyra responded respectfully. If the Primarch were listening at that very moment, he would have been utterly shocked. What Asher had deduced regarding the secret arrangement between the Wargraves and the assassination organization was indeed accurate. It was a matter that had been kept under the strictest secrecy. After all, someone could easily pay the assassin group more to break the deal and truly eliminate a Wargrave. But the Wargraves always took precautions against such outcomes. They were no fools. Yet, Asher had deduced all of this from just a few casual words spoken by Malric and Withenia, words they had likely said without much thought. Even Asher himself marveled at his own deductive prowess. He hadn't even been actively analyzing the situation. Lyra had merely asked a question, and the deductions had unfolded in his mind with chilling clarity, as if he were solving basic arithmetic. He found himself quietly impressed with the speed and accuracy of his own mind. No wonder heroes always suffer at the hands of villains, Asher mused silently. Heroes are typically overpowered but possess almost no intellect, while villains rely heavily on wit and cunning. That's why they always escape at the last second. They can't overpower the hero, so they outthink them and make them suffer. If I can think this far without even trying, imagine what I could do if I actually put effort into it. His thoughts continued, a hint of self-praise weaving through his internal monologue. Sigh. No wonder intelligent people often meet tragic ends. They eventually grow arrogant, and their own brilliance leads them straight into their downfall. Asher concluded inwardly, then shook his head as if to dispel the train of thought entirely. But Asher wasn't the only one who had arrived at the conclusion that the assassin organization might turn against the Wargraves after enduring 10 consecutive failures. Individuals like Malric, Withenia, and certain experienced elders had also entertained similar thoughts. Privately, many of them were looking forward to such a betrayal. Although they couldn't interfere with the death of a sun or moon during the true awakening, they could certainly retaliate against the assassin organization if they dared make a direct move. I must say, your intelligence is truly terrifying, young master, Lyra remarked. I'm just average, Asher said with a shrug. I'm certain there are plenty of old men and women scheming behind the scenes right now. Like the Emperor, he thought privately, but refrained from saying aloud. Asher rose from the bed where he had been sitting and spoke once more. Lyra, I'll need a lot of food. After coming so close to death several times over the past 6 hours, I've come to appreciate the simple joys of life. Lyra bowed with a knowing smile. I anticipated this, young master. I've already prepared a feast in advance, she replied. Asher nodded in approval, then turned toward the bathroom. Having someone who can anticipate your needs. Now, that's a luxury, he thought to himself, smiling slightly as he walked away. The door closed softly behind him as he locked it. After several minutes of bathing, he stepped out, refreshed, and dressed in one of the elegant new outfits he had purchased while in the capital for the royal party. Just a few minutes later, Lyra returned with a large cart loaded with food. She arranged the dishes carefully on the table, the smile never leaving her face. Hey, Lyra, Asher asked, raising an eyebrow. How did you manage all this? I thought you were sealed off somewhere. I made the necessary preparations a day before, young master. In situations like this, I must stay several steps ahead, she replied, her tone light, yet proud. It seems I'm becoming a foodie, Asher mused as he stared at the array of dishes laid out before him. Well, not that I could get fat, even if I wanted to. Perk of the bloodline, he thought, and then he immediately began eating. After finishing everything Lyra had served him, Asher stood up from his seat, his stomach now pleasantly full, and collapsed onto the bed with a satisfied sigh. Lyra entered the room once again to clear the plates. She did so quietly, then left just as swiftly. Within seconds, Asher drifted off into sleep. After all, he had been both exhausted and famished for some time now. A peaceful silence blanketed the room, and the only sound that remained was the soft, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping young master. Asher could be seen lying on his soft white bed, the gentle rhythm of his breathing echoing faintly within the room. The morning sun cast golden rays through the window pane as the curtains struggled valiantly to keep them at bay. Although Asher had slept off in the early morning of the day the true awakening ended, he hadn't awoken that same day. Instead, he opened his eyes the following morning, having nearly slept a staggering 24 hours. He was both mentally and physically drained. After all, it had been his first time experiencing something as intense and overwhelming as the true awakening. Asher's eyes fluttered open, his gaze drifting toward the window. Rising from his position, he moved closer and pushed the curtain aside to behold the rising sun, painting the sky in hues of amber and gold. How long did I sleep? Why is it still early in the morning? I thought I'd wake up in the evening at least, Asher mumbled to himself. His eyes shifted toward the clock hanging on the wall, the ticking of its hands steady and unbothered. It was 7:12 a.m. Did I sleep an entire day? Asher wondered internally. System, how long was I asleep? He asked mentally. The host was asleep for 22 hours. The system, his ever-reliable personal timekeeper, chimed in, emotionless yet prompt. Sigh. Asher exhaled in resignation. It seems I was just that exhausted and didn't even realize it, he thought. His eyes dropped to his previously bloated stomach, still remembering the aftermath of yesterday's heavy feast. But now, it was flat, his powerful metabolism having already digested everything he had consumed. I wonder what today has in store for me. Asher mused, although he had no particular plans. His thoughts gradually drifted toward his system. Having broken past his former limits, he was eager to see what his current stats looked like. Status, he commanded mentally. Name, Asher Wargrave. Age, 17. Bloodline, the Wargrave lineage. Physique, absolute physique. Titles, youngest heir, 10th son, disgrace of the Wargrave. Unique body holder. Life rank, Kindlestar. Sublife rank, Radiant. Affinity, Lightning. Strength, 58, 108. Agility, 59, 105. Vitality, 58, 100. Perception, 60, 101. Asher smiled softly. Every stat had improved since the last time he checked, more than 5 months ago. He vividly recalled the moment he first awakened the system. Back then, his base stats were in the tens, still broken by all standards. But his unique physique had doubled those figures almost instantly. Now he had ascended to the peak of the second life rank, Kindlestar. It wasn't a minor accomplishment. Achieving this while training tirelessly from morning till night, with barely enough time to cultivate, bordered on the impossible. But Asher had made it happen. Kale, who had reached the Dust Kindlestar rank, took 2 full years to attain it. Asher had not only reached, but surpassed that milestone in less than half the time. A sense of pride bloomed in his chest. His omni-perception now extended to a 10-meter radius. Previously, the ability had granted him a flawless 360-degree view within its limited range. But now, with his perception stat breaking the 100-point barrier, something had shifted. His senses within omni-perception had sharpened. Before, he couldn't detect invisible entities directly and had to rely on minute changes in wind flow to anticipate their attacks. Now he could perceive every suspended particle of Astra, motes of golden-like energy dancing through the air. He could see them. He could feel them. A whole new dimension of reality had opened up around him. The Astra motes danced joyously around him, like spirited children, twinkling and spiraling in elegant patterns. When he moved his hand, they shifted and swirled accordingly, responding to his presence and intent. Asher's smile deepened. Through the Astra's interaction with the world, he could now track movements and threats more effectively, no longer dependent solely on changes in air pressure or direction. Aren't I at least supposed to receive a new title? Asher wondered, noting the absence of any recent additions. However, after reviewing the current list of titles, he arrived at a likely conclusion. Either the system or the world itself needed to recognize such achievements before new titles were granted. Since no one outside the Wargrave household had witnessed his true awakening, he hadn't earned public acknowledgement, and thus, no new title. It seems I won't be going to the first training ground this morning, Asher murmured to himself. Turning on his heel, he made his way to the bathroom. After a quick but refreshing bath, he changed into a fresh set of clothes and returned to his room, where he casually sprawled onto the bed with a contented grin. With no pressing tasks or obligations, he decided to enjoy the rare luxury of doing absolutely nothing. A perfect day off. But mere minutes passed, and the creeping sensation of boredom began to settle in. What a boring world, Asher complained internally. He had a full day off. He could remain in bed, simply basking in laziness. It's something about the idleness gnawed at him. Back in his previous world, humans had phones and various gadgets to keep their minds occupied during leisure. No wonder those old men and women are always scheming. They're simply too bored to sit still, so they wander around causing trouble just to feel alive, Asher thought with a weak sigh, shifting slightly on the bed to adjust his position. What do kids my age even do for fun in this stone-aged world, aside from training, fighting, and killing? He paused. Maybe I should help this world advance its technology. With my intelligence and talent, I could definitely juggle being both a scientist and a cultivator. The idea lingered for a moment and then dissipated. He was simply too lazy to embark on such a thankless endeavor. There was little for him to gain. Money? He'd spent over 2,000 gold coins in a single day just from one visit to the capital. As the son of a duke, wealth was the least of his concerns. Besides, if his family ever discovered he was pursuing the path of a radical scientist, they'd likely knock some sense into him. And Asher had no interest in discovering firsthand just how hard the Primarch's fists were. Maybe I should make some friends, he mused as his thoughts drifted to Velra Lux Vanthelmore, the princess of the Empire. I just hope these nobles aren't the type who go around bullying commoners for amusement. I'm not wasting my time with that nonsense just to gain shallow friendships. Satisfied with that internal decree, Asher closed his eyes once again. Since there was nothing pressing to do, he decided he might as well drift back into sleep. After all, another few hours of peaceful rest couldn't hurt. But just as Asher closed his eyes, ready to drift off again after sleeping for 22 hours, a soft knock echoed from the door. "Come in," he answered lazily, still sprawled in his relaxed position on the bed. "Good morning, young master," Lyra greeted with a respectful bow, just as she had done every single day for the past 6 months. "Morning," Asher replied casually. "Young master, is there anything wrong? Are you experiencing any complications?" Lyra asked, her tone holding a trace of concern, almost shaky. "Is it because I slept almost a full day?" Asher wondered to himself. "I'm fine, Lyra. I was just getting some well-needed rest. After coming so close to death, it's only fair that I start appreciating simple things like sleep," Asher replied with a faint smirk. "You'll get used to it soon," Lyra responded calmly. "Getting used to almost dying," Asher echoed her words in his thoughts. But he wasn't surprised. In this world, death came as frequently as sunrise. Emoviri rose daily, born from the unending tide of human emotion. At a certain point, people simply had to grow numb to it. No species in this world adapted faster or more ruthlessly than humans. "Well, the first sun and second moon were asking about you. But since you slept this long, I was sent to check if anything was wrong," Lyra informed him before continuing. "I'll return after reporting back to them, young master." With another graceful bow, she turned and exited the room. Asher had told her numerous times to stop bowing so often, but Lyra had refused, stating that once a single line is crossed, others quickly follow, and soon all boundaries become blurred. Asher never pressed her on what she meant. He already understood. With a lazy yawn, Asher closed his eyes once again. Although he was admittedly bored, it didn't mean he was going to start actively looking for something to do. He had made up his mind. Today he would waste the entire day in bed. However, only a few minutes passed before Lyra returned, this time pushing in a cart laden with food. Asher stared at the cart, unsure of what to say. After the feast he had indulged in the day before, he wasn't even slightly hungry. Lyra, you know exactly how much I ate yesterday. Yet here you are again, with another full meal. Are you trying to fatten me up or something? He asked with a raised brow, half amused and half suspicious. Lyra had a tendency to prepare meals ahead of time, as though she were a secret foodie herself. I always bring 3 meals a day, young master. And considering you've gone nearly a whole day without eating, it's only proper, Lyra replied smoothly. You can take it back. I'm fine for now, Asher said, waving a dismissive hand. Lyra didn't argue. She simply nodded, then wheeled the cart back to the kitchen before returning to Asher's side. I thought Big Brother and Big Sister would have left by now. Weren't they always complaining about how busy they were? Asher asked, stretching lazily. I do not know exactly when they plan to leave, young master. But none of the suns or moons have departed the estate yet. It seems they intend to spend a brief amount of time within the estate before resuming their duties. After all, it isn't every day that the entire family gathers under one roof, Lyra explained. Understandable. Asher nodded in agreement. But Lyra, I have something to ask, he said, his tone shifting slightly. I will answer to the best of my abilities, young master, she replied dutifully. What do people my age do for fun around here? Asher inquired. Although he had claimed he would remain in bed all day doing nothing, his curiosity got the better of him. There was truly no one better to ask than Lyra. He had a few colleagues here, Ella, Hito, and Tom, but he wasn't quite sure how to categorize them. Were they friends? Or perhaps something closer to work companions? Either way, he figured they were all currently at the first training ground, being pushed to their physical limits by Instructor Harold. Lyra fell silent for a moment, lost in thought. It seems the young master is seeking something entertaining to do. Since he doesn't have any close companions his age, there really isn't much to suggest, she pondered internally. After a few seconds of consideration, she finally replied, Young master, there isn't a great deal one can do for amusement at your age without friends. However, you could try learning to ride a horse. While many don't bother since they're faster than horses themselves, you'd be doing it for enjoyment. And besides, who knows when such a skill might come in handy? Asher smiled. Indeed, he had never learned how to ride a horse. Not in his past life as Ethan, and not in this one either. The original Asher had spent his entire life maximizing his physique, leaving no room for such leisurely pursuits. Although he was fairly certain he'd master horse riding instantly due to his physique and instincts, that wasn't the point. The joy wasn't in learning how to ride. It was in the experience of riding itself. I like that suggestion. Anything else? Asher asked, intrigued. But Lyra simply shook her head and said, I can't think of much else. Perhaps only training and sparring, but I assume those are not what you're looking for today. Asher let out a sigh. He had seen that one coming. Sparring and training weren't fun to him. They were tools for progress and discipline. He would never treat them as mere hobbies. But, young master, since you love combat so much, why don't you go into the forest and fight a few beasts? Lyra suggested lightly. I've no interest in creatures that rely solely on instinct. It's not exciting if I can predict their every move like a child playing pretend, Asher replied, sounding more bored than dismissive. Perhaps an Emovira would suffice, Asher mused aloud. Since he had awakened in this world, he hadn't encountered a single one. He had half expected to see one during the true awakening, but none had appeared. Lyra remained silent. She neither encouraged nor discouraged the thought. In the end, it didn't matter what she said. Asher was a wargrave. His path would inevitably cross with an Emovira soon. Suddenly, a wide smile spread across Asher's face. His lips curved upward, his expression lit with mischief or perhaps recognition, as he turned his head slightly and spoke to seemingly no one. "Come in, come in." As Asher's voice reverberated through the room, Lyra raised a brow in mild confusion, wondering who her young master was speaking to. Her senses swept across the room and extended a few meters beyond the walls, but she detected nothing. Just as she was about to ask Asher whom he was addressing, the door creaked open. A gentle footstep echoed, and a man dressed in a pristine butler uniform with white gloves stepped inside. Zarek, the Primarch's personal right-hand man. Lyra's face momentarily reflected surprise before her expression returned to calm. She wasn't astonished by her failure to sense Zarek's presence. She knew she couldn't, not even if she tried 1,000,000 times. What truly caught her off guard was the fact that Asher had sensed him when she had not. Zarek spoke with a faint smile the moment he entered, not bothering with formal greetings. "It seems the 10th son's senses have evolved significantly after dancing between life and death for a while." Asher smiled slightly. He had sensed Zarek's body interacting with the astromotes. Even if Zarek managed to erase his presence completely, cloaking himself from even the most advanced sensory abilities, it was now impossible for him to escape Asher's perception. Zarek himself was mildly surprised, though he did not show it. He merely smiled and commented. He did not ask any questions. It wasn't his place to do so. "Good morning, Zarek," Asher greeted as he shifted from his reclined position on the bed into a seated one. He knew that whenever Zarek appeared, it was due to an order from the Primarch himself. "Good morning, 10th son," Zarek replied with a slight bow of respect. Lyra remained silent, standing respectfully at the side. "I assume Father calls for my presence once again?" Asher asked, his tone neutral. "Yes, 10th Sunday. I have been ordered to escort you," Zarek replied with a firm nod. "Let's go, then," Asher said as he immediately rose to his feet, seeing no point in delaying. "As you wish, 10th son," Zarek intoned as he turned around and led the way. With that, Asher, Lyra, and Zarek stepped out of the room. As Asher walked, he inhaled deeply, appreciating the freshness of the air and the sights around him, things he had long taken for granted. Others might be accustomed to the constant threat of death and the harsh reality of life or death battles, but he wasn't. This had been his first truly intimate brush with death, and it left him feeling oddly grateful just to be alive. The world seemed more vibrant, more alive somehow, but Asher suspected this was partly due to his omniperception. Within a 10-meter radius around him, golden motes of Astra floated gently, like specks of stardust gracing his path. Although Astra is invisible and can only be felt, I can sort of see it now. But if I can see it, then it stands to reason that others might possess the same ability, Asher mused. As they made their way through the halls, maids and butlers bowed in his direction. Asher noticed a subtle difference in their demeanor and posture. In the past, their bows had been mere gestures of obligation. They respected his name as a wargrave and as a son, even if they viewed him as a waste. But now that he had survived the true awakening, everything had changed. He had proven himself. He was no longer a discarded shadow behind his siblings. He was now counted among their ranks, a genius in his own right. Asher was fully aware of the shift. He remembered the way they used to look at him, dismissive, indifferent, and he recognized the reverence in their eyes now. But he couldn't care less. Their opinions, their emotions, none of it mattered. He didn't know them well enough to bother giving a damn about what they thought. The simple truth remained. They would look at him from a distance for the rest of their lives. From the corner of his eye, Asher caught sight of Thalric and one of the moons sparring in the courtyard. It didn't even need to be said. Thalric was clearly getting his ass handed to him. As the second weakest wargrave, he stood no real chance. Zarek didn't remind Asher of the waiting Primarch. He simply waited in silence, wearing his ever-neutral expression. Thalric's opponent was the fifth moon, a female sibling for whom Malric had once raised an entire barren household, merely because its young lord had smiled while staring at her backside. At times, Asher couldn't begin to understand what went on in Malric's head. Although he had never personally witnessed such an act from him, Hillary served as a living testament to Malric's extreme sense of honor. Malric had annihilated Hillary's noble household just because their young master looked at Withenia, the second moon, funny. Asher had concluded that the two noble households which fell to Malric's wrath must have been relatively weak. The second noble household probably ranked as Baron or Viscount House. After all, more powerful noble families, like those of counts, marquises, or dukes, possessed formidable knights capable of resisting such actions, of course merely for a few minutes, making evidence harder to hide. Asher wasn't sure he could bring himself to obliterate an entire bloodline just because someone looked at his sisters lustfully. Sure, he might do one or two things as a big brother looking out for his little sister, but total annihilation? No, that wasn't in him. He wasn't a maniac, and he hadn't suddenly become one simply because he was now somewhat accustomed to killing or had acquired a system that granted him formidable abilities. As thoughts of Malric's psychopathic tendencies flooded his mind, Asher paused, then shook his head. It seems I haven't fully shed my morals from my previous life as Ethan. He reflected silently, his gaze lingering on the fifth moon who sparred with Thalric, wielding a simple training bow. I should probably adapt to this world's reality soon. After all, supernatural deaths occur daily across various empires. With that sobering thought, he turned and exhaled softly, the bloodshed that awaited him looming in his mind like an unwelcome shadow. It seems I should be saying goodbye to my normal life, Asher thought, as his pace fell in line with Zarek's, ready to face whatever awaited him in the side of the Premarch. As Asher arrived at the chambers where Azarin resided, Zarek pushed the grand doors open, and Asher stepped in with graceful, measured strides. Within the room, Azarin could be seen seated, holding a sheet of paper in hand, appearing every bit like a corporate office worker lost in concentration. "I greet the Patriarch," Asher said, bowing respectfully. Azarin did not speak at first. He simply continued reading what he held. After finishing, he set the paper aside and slowly raised his golden eyes, fixing his piercing gaze upon Asher. "Congratulations on making it back in one piece. That, in itself, is an achievement," Azarin stated calmly. "It's expected of a wargrave." "Pre-march," Asher replied. Whenever he was unsure of how to receive praise, he defaulted to that phrase. "It's expected of a wargrave." Sometimes a simple thank you would suffice, youngest, Azarin said, his voice even. "Thank you, pre-march," Asher responded instantly, rising from his bowed position with practiced fluidity. "Call me father from now on, at least when we are alone," Azarin said, his tone softening ever so slightly. Asher hesitated. He had only ever referred to Azarin as father when a man wasn't present, never to his face. But now, could he truly bring himself to say it aloud? He knew he wasn't the real Asher everyone knew. Azarin didn't know this. Nobody did. He had awakened in this world under circumstances unknown to him, inhabiting a body and a life that were not originally his. Although he had no family in his past life, Asher, no, Ethan, had always longed for one. A sister, a brother, a mother, a father. But just because he had wished for it didn't mean he'd ever search for it. Despite his wealth in his previous life, he had never once made an effort to track down his biological family. That unfulfilled longing had created a persistent void within him, a void he had hoped to fill with Jennifer and the family he once intended to build with her. And now, here stood a man who wasn't his father, asking to be called one. Could he decline? He dare not. But still, what right did he truly have? What right did he, Ethan, have to usurp the place of someone else's son? Even if the original Asher had been a coward or a failure, this life, this family, did not rightfully belong to him. It was never meant to. Yet he knew better than to open his mouth and confess the truth. He would be jailed or executed on the spot. The Wargraves would never tolerate such a blasphemous act as body possession. After 6 months of living among them, he had come to understand them to some degree. If they knew, he would be branded an Emovira. Although he had grown to accept this role, as Asher, as a Wargrave, as part of this monstrous but fascinating family, these thoughts always clawed their way back. He was human, after all. He had emotions, doubts, insecurities. He wasn't a machine. He wasn't cold-blooded. Yet regardless of what he felt, this was his reality now. He couldn't decline. He had to accept it if he wished to survive. And if he was being honest with himself, he was beginning to like Malric and Withenia. There was something about them that warmed him despite the madness in their blood. Though he would never be the real Asher, and though he would always live with the gnawing guilt of being an imposter, maybe, just maybe, this was his second chance. His chance at familial love. A chance to fill the void that only Jennifer had managed to soften. A small, almost involuntary smile appeared on his face as he looked at Azarin and responded, "Yes, Father." "How do you feel?" Azarin asked. "I mean, after all your battles and experiences. Are there any side effects? Any adverse consequences?" His face remained neutral, but deep inside, his heart swelled with a quiet joy. "No, Father. I'm perfectly fine. Viralasa has precise and thorough healing capabilities," Asher replied with calm confidence. He had half expected Viralasa to materialize at the mention of her name, but she remained curiously silent, unbothered, perhaps. Azarin gave a slight nod, then said, "Since you've completed your first mission, it's time for a reward." Asher's eyes glinted subtly at the word reward. He had been awaiting this moment for quite some time. "As Wargraves, we possess countless techniques," Azarin began, his voice adopting the tone of an instructor. "Throughout our existence, we've wielded nearly every weapon imaginable. You will be granted 2 rapier techniques aligned with the lightning element, and 1 standard movement technique without elemental affinity," he continued. But then his tone shifted, growing heavier. "However," Azarin added, pausing as though for effect, "we are Wargraves. We do not rely solely on what has been handed down. We carve our own paths. We forge our own techniques, unique, personal, unparalleled. The techniques you will receive now are temporary, a stopgap. They are merely to sustain you until you begin creating your own world." There was a quiet finality to his words. Asher's thoughts stalled for a moment. While techniques were considered gradeless, could someone truly create one from nothing? That level of innovation required vision, talent, and a deep understanding of self. Truly, a family of monsters, he thought, a strange admiration blooming beneath the weight of expectation. There was no such thing as a standardized Wargrave technique. Every sun, moon, elder, even the great elders had personally crafted their own original techniques, customized to their weapons, elemental affinities, and any unique abilities they awakened during their true awakenings. Asher believed he could create his own eventually, but he also understood the process would require more than raw talent. It demanded insight, precision, knowledge, and an unshakable foundation. He wouldn't rush it. He wouldn't create anything until he was certain, until everything he needed was in place. "Thank you, Father," Asher said with sincerity as he bowed once again. But he didn't need these techniques. Not really. He already had the techniques he obtained from Hillary. More than that, with his battle instincts, he could analyze and use the techniques of others just by observing them. Why accept a reward that he could acquire elsewhere, without effort? He opened his mouth to make a request, to voice the true reward he wanted. In the blink of an eye, Asher and Hillary materialized at a single point in space, rapiers drawn, their rapier gleaming with lethal intent. Like twin cobras striking in perfect synchronicity, their hands shot forward, both aiming for the same point at the same moment. A sharp clang shattered the stillness as the tips of their rapiers collided. The very air at the point of impact shrieked in protest before erupting outward in a concussive burst. Their garments fluttered violently from the shockwave, yet neither combatant yielded ground. Eyes locked, they stood as mirrored reflections, 2 minds sharing one rhythm, one intent, one moment. Though their feet remained rooted, their arms blurred into motion, unleashing a relentless storm of thrusts. Each strike was met with another, a flawless counter, as steel kissed steel again and again in a savage ballet of speed and strength. Within a single minute, their rapier had clashed over 1,000 times. The ground beneath them had sunken under the strain, a crater forming from the sheer intensity of their duel. Earth and stone erupted outward, flung aside by the explosive force of their confrontation. With a thunderous boom, the earth caved in further beneath them, the sudden collapse breaking their rhythm and disrupting their successive exchange. Yet even as their footing faltered, their gazes remained locked, unbending, unblinking, bound by unspoken challenge. In the next instant, they vanished from the fractured ravine, their figures blurring into motion as they surged into the forest beyond. No astra, no elemental power, just the raw, unfiltered mastery of rapier combat. Their forms sliced through the woodland like phantom blades, each movement a testament to lethal efficiency. Trees, stones, anything unfortunate enough to obstruct their path, were annihilated in an instant, obliterated as gaping voids tore through their centers, remnants of the sheer velocity and force behind every step and strike. Beneath the waning glow of the moon, two streaks of light carved through the air, gliding across meters as if space itself dared not hinder their path. Each pass birthed a storm of sparks, scattering like burning embers and casting the night sky in hues of molten orange. They moved like phantoms, ghostly, untouchable, yet devastating. Blades whispered through the air, slicing reality as if cleaving through the very fabric of existence. Every clash of their rapiers resounded like the toll of a distant bell, solemn, resonant, heralding not merely combat, but the collision of two indomitable wills. It was more than a duel. It was a reckoning. Though Asher had heard Hillary claim he was now an assassin who still bore the heart of a knight, he refused to entertain such romanticized nonsense. Trusting a man like Hillary, even for a moment, could mean death. Even now, despite their ongoing duel being devoid of Astra, Asher's gaze never wavered from Hillary's entire form, watching with ruthless stare for any sudden or hidden maneuver. Virilis screamed in his grip, the blade vibrating with eagerness as Asher moved in perfect sync with it. He feinted, his rapier carving a serpentine path of deception through the air. Hillary adjusted to defend, but the moment he committed, Asher's trajectory shifted with surgical accuracy. And yet, Hillary responded, not with surprise, but as if he had foreseen it from the very beginning. Hillary's rapier shimmered, then vanished into a blur of motion. In the next breath, hundreds of crescent slashes materialized around him like conjured wind blades, as if the sheer force of his movements had compelled reality itself to obey. Asher's eyes narrowed, the purple hue in his gaze gleaming with focus. He had never witnessed this technique before, but his battle instincts were honed beyond reason. His body responded before thought could catch up. Muscles coiled. Virilis rose. The moment the swirling cuts closed in, Asher moved fluid and precise, mirroring the technique with uncanny accuracy. Together, he and Virilis unleashed the same devastating motion. In an instant, a storm of cutting wind erupted from him. Hundreds of phantom blades tore through the space between them, meeting Hillary's in a violent symphony. Sword marks ravaged the earth. Trenches split the terrain, stretching for meters. Trees, mighty and tall, were diced into clean fragments, reduced to logs as if sliced by invisible executioners. The forest groaned under the weight of their destructive power. But Asher didn't remain still. The moment he executed the technique, his perfect muscle memory had already committed and refined it flawlessly. What had taken Hillary years to master, Asher adapted within seconds. He and Virilis moved again, their synchronization absolute, one body, one mind, one blade. His arm blurred into motion. The air howled in protest, but it was forced to yield beneath the weight of his will. Hundreds of razor-sharp wind slashes bled into existence once more, but this time they carried a different purpose. No longer a mirror or a defense, they were an assault. Sharper, faster, ruthless. Each cut tore through space like a predator unchained, seeking Hillary with deadly intent. Hillary wasn't surprised by the sight before him. He had been watching Asher for the past 5 hours, ever since the true awakening began. He had seen Asher carve through veteran assassins with ease, reducing years of honed skill to fleeting moments of futility. He had watched him wield daggers with stolen precision, mimicking their techniques flawlessly. Even the whip, an unfamiliar weapon, had bent to Asher's will on the first attempt, as if it had always belonged in his hand. So no, Hillary wasn't shocked that Asher had replicated the wind-cutting technique so perfectly. And yet, a silent thunder echoed in his chest, a sensation long buried beneath layers of experience and detachment. When was the last time he had felt this? When was the last time he stood against another rapier wielder, someone who could challenge him with raw talent and unrelenting instinct? His expression remained stone. He said nothing. Words had no place in battle, not for him. Just action. Without a word, Hillary shifted into stance, silent, sharp, absolute. His presence deepened, pressing down on the world like a rising tide. Then he moved. In the blink of an eye, his form vanished into a streak of black light, erupting outward in a burst of blinding speed and overwhelming force. His rapier clashed against the incoming wind blades, not with hesitation, but with dominance. Each arc of his blade shredded through the attacks, as though they were made of paper. He cut, he cleaved, he dismantled the very air around him. Over a century of battle-hardened instinct blazed in every motion. This was no longer mere combat. It was art formed through war. A massive dust storm erupted, surging upward in a chaotic spiral that swallowed the battlefield whole. Amidst the swirling haze, only twin flashes, one black, one silver, could be seen, streaking through the smoke like gods of war unleashed. And then silence. The lights vanished, consumed by the rising veil of dust, leaving behind only stillness and a world holding its breath. Asher's eyes pierced through the churning dust storm, unblinking. Though the haze clouded sight, his senses blared within his mind like sirens, warning him, guiding him. He dared not remain still.